Hogwarts, Treasure Hunting with the Eye of God, Episode 71. The game begins. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the first Quidditch match of this year kicked off. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the sun was shining brightly, and the Quidditch stadium was already bustling with people. All the teachers and students of the school seemed to have gathered here, eagerly looking forward to this wonderful match. Many students also bought telescopes from the One U shop, ready to capture every wonderful moment. Even Professor Trelawney, who had lived on the top floor of the Hogwarts Tower for a long time and lived in seclusion, suddenly showed up to watch the game today. The old house girl sat in the back row of the side stands, occupying 2 seats by herself, sitting cross-legged on the chair, staring at the prophecy ball in her hand, and muttered mysteriously, "Ah, I noticed. The darkness is approaching, and the terrible feeling is getting stronger. The future is chaotic, and it seems that someone is about to fall. In short, this is a grand event for the whole school." Hermione was the odd one out. She grumbled in dissatisfaction, "How can Quidditch scores be counted into the House Cup? So many points are awarded for one game, so wouldn't our hard work be worthless?" Ting was unmoved. He calmly pointed out, "If Quidditch scores are not counted into the House Cup, I'm afraid no one will care about the so-called house points. Besides," he continued, "wouldn't the House Cup become a niche game, held only for you and us Ravenclaw? The influence might not even be as good as Gobberdole's." Hermione was speechless for a moment after hearing these words. She reluctantly gave up the idea of writing a letter of advice to Dumbledore on this matter. Ting and Zhang Qiu sat in the last row of Ravenclaw, watching the game from a high position. Where Ting was, Susan was naturally indispensable. Hermione also sat here on purpose. During this period of time, they often worked together, doing some work such as cutting fabrics, making parts, and painting, and their relationship became closer and closer. Ron also followed. It was not because his relationship with Hermione had eased, but because he was commissioned by his twin brother to hang a banner supporting Gryffindor on the Ravenclaw stand. As a member of the One U shop, business is business, but you still have to have a stance. 11 Ron frantically struggled for a long time, but he was unable to hang the banner on the top of the Ravenclaw stand. His spells were really clumsy, and people were anxious for him. Finally, Hermione couldn't help it. She waved her wand lightly and used the floating spell to make this huge Gryffindor banner float in the sky. The banner unfolded with the wind under the effect of the floating spell. The majestic lion painted on it stepped on a green snake and roared, as if cheering for the game. However, there were more than one banner on the scene. Perhaps it was Ting's advertising line based on the arms dealer that worked. There were no less than 10 banners of varying sizes floating on the stands of the 4 colleges, not counting those whose magic was too poor to float. It must be said that Ting's estimate of sales was quite accurate. The distribution of banners was generally that Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, and Ravenclaw all hung Gryffindor banners, and only Slytherin insisted on hanging its own banner. In terms of quantity, Gryffindor's banners were almost twice that of Slytherin's, and this gap was also reflected in other items such as the college hats and cheering sticks. However, in terms of quality, Slytherin's banner was undoubtedly better. Especially the one in the center of the Slytherin stand. The banner was not only made of satin, but also decorated with gold lace. What was even more amazing was that there were animated images of each player on the banner. The effect was immediate. The morale of the Slytherin players was greatly boosted after seeing this surprise. It can be said that the little lions were completely defeated in terms of supporting the team. Ron looked at the exquisite banner and couldn't help complaining. "Why don't we have such cool banners?" Hermione rolled her eyes and said unhappily, "It's simple, because Gryffindor doesn't have that much money." Ron was confused. "Hermione, what does this have to do with money?" Hermione looked at Ting, who thought for a moment and told the truth, "We sold these cool banners to Slytherin." "What?" Ron's voice suddenly rose, his face full of astonishment. "Why? Why do you want to help Slytherin?" His tone was a little excited, as if he had been betrayed. "If it was sold to Ravenclaw, I could understand, but that's Slytherin. Our enemy. In fact, the we that Ting said is not just him, but also includes me, George and Fred." Hermione pointed out coldly upon hearing Ron's questioning tone. Ron was completely confused. George and Fred are also included. How could they help their enemies? Aren't they also the beaters in the team? Ting patiently explained, "This is what Malfoy ordered from me. It cost 50 galleons. It's not free. If you have money, you can also come to the One U shop to order it. By the way," he added at last, "George and Fred can also get a share of the money, so they don't care." Hearing this, Ron shut up immediately. Sometimes, gold galleons are more persuasive than any eloquence. Before the game started, Susan took out a bunch of tempting delicacies from her pocket like a magician and distributed them to everyone: butter shortbread, popcorn, chocolate, caramel pudding, croissants. These were all prepared by the elves in the kitchen. This is the privilege of being a Hufflepuff student, being able to enter and exit the cafeteria at will and receive preferential treatment from the house elves. Seeing this scene, Ron immediately licked his face and stayed, eating happily. With his mouth full of snacks, he asked vaguely, do you think, you can win this game? Ting gave a panacea answer: Ron, the quaffle is round, the field changes rapidly, and anything can happen. But of course we will support Harry. Susan and Zhangqiu also nodded. After all, the Weasley twins were in the Gryffindor team, so it was natural to support Gryffindor. Hermione looked around carefully, then leaned next to Ting and said seriously, Ting, I heard a message before that Professor Snape tried to pass by Fluffy on Halloween Eve. Ron also echoed seriously, yes, this is what Harry and I saw with our own eyes. We saw him going in that direction at the time. Ting glanced at the two of them, with a puzzled look on his face. Snape taught to go in. Is there anything strange? Doesn't he go to that place less frequently? At least more than Yi Ling. Isn't this strange? Ron seemed to have heard something incredible. That's the restricted area set by Professor Dumbledore. There is a ferocious three-headed dog guarding it. It is very likely that there are important things hidden in it, such as Dumbledore's treasure or something. Unfortunately, there are no mysterious treasures in it that you imagine. Holy Grace. Susan smiled and revealed the answer. The end of that passage is actually Professor Dumbledore's office. Ah? Ron was confused. He remembered that Harry had told him, Professor Snape tried to pass by Fluffy, the three-headed dog, and he was looking for the mysterious object guarded by the big dog. Harry even suspected that the troll that day was deliberately put in by Snape. After the two discussed, they felt that they could ask Ting for help. After all, it was he who successfully killed the troll, and he also had a bad relationship with Professor Snape. However, now that he heard that the end of the passage was actually the principal's office, Ron began to waver. This means that Harry's previous speculation may be problematic. But Hermione suddenly interrupted. Although she had known that the end of the passage was the principal's office, she still insisted on her point of view. I thought about it carefully after I went back. Ting, you once said that the level has not been fully designed. You also told me that everything the headmaster does has its deep meaning. So, why did he go to great lengths to design such a level? It can't be to catch those little wizards who wander at night, right? She drank a sip of pumpkin juice and continued, I went back to ask around, and found that many Gryffindor wizards have tried that level, but they all stopped at Fluffy. That level may be simple for you, but for others, it is an insurmountable obstacle. Zhangqiu and Susan fell into deep thought after hearing this. Ting looked at Hermione with admiration. The girl was really the smartest which he had ever seen. Ting looked at Hermione with admiration. She was indeed the smartest which Ting had ever seen. Her analysis was reasonable, and even if she hadn't read the original book, she could get closer to the truth step by step with subtle clues. In this case, it would be fine to reveal some information to her, which could also remind them to stay alert. The most suspicious person should be Quirrell. Professor Quirrell? Hermione frowned. How could he be related to this matter? On the night of the Halloween dinner, it was not only Professor Snape who went to the restricted area on the 4th floor. Ting said casually, I also found Professor Quirrell's whereabouts. Of course, he did not see this incident with his own eyes, but who is Quirrell, doesn't he know? Susan also looked solemn. Indeed, he suddenly fainted at the dinner, and then mysteriously appeared on the 4th floor. There must be something fishy about this. Ron said hesitantly, maybe Professor Quirrell went to stop Snape from going in. We shouldn't doubt him casually. Why do you always keep an eye on Professor Snape? Zhangqiu looked at Ron dissatisfiedly. Why can't you not doubt Quirrell? Ron was blushing and speechless when asked. Ting knew where Ron's prejudice came from. Snape's troubles with Gryffindor, his targeting of Harry, and his sarcastic words made it difficult for people to have a good impression of him. Although Quirrell was equally unpleasant, his cowardly appearance made it difficult for people to associate him with bad things. These are all prejudices brought about by personality, and the truth is often hidden under the appearance. There are some things I can't tell you now, Ting said slowly, but one thing I can be sure of is that Professor Snape has been teaching at Hogwarts for 10 years. If he really had a problem, Professor Dumbledore would have discovered it long ago. And Professor Quirrell, he is only in his first year at our school. Ting didn't want to go to great lengths to convince them, so he directly attributed the reason to Dumbledore's wisdom. This trick really worked. Hermione was convinced when Dumbledore was mentioned, and Ron also felt that what he said made sense. As they were chatting, the game began. "Here comes the Gryffindor team." Commentator Lee Jordan suddenly shouted, instantly igniting the enthusiasm of the audience. He has always been responsible for the important task of commentating on the game. Harry Potter, Katie Bell, Angelina Johnson, Alicia Spinnet and the Weasley brothers, and finally the captain Oliver Wood. Lee Jordan excitedly introduced the list of players. Yes, Potter is a freshman who became a seeker after Charlie left. He is also one of the youngest players in the past century. Charlie is Ron and the twins' older brother, and the previous seeker of Gryffindor, but unfortunately, he graduated last year. Lee Jordan paused and continued, "According to the inside information I got from Wood, Harry is definitely qualified for this position. Therefore, even if the game has not yet started, I dare to assert that this Gryffindor Quidditch team is definitely the golden generation of Hogwarts in recent years." However, Lee Jordan's comments were drowned in the boos of the audience. "I have seen people who can blow, but I have never seen people who can blow so well. You said the same thing last semester." Madame Hooch served as the referee of this game. She stood in the center of the court, holding a flying broom, waiting for the players from both sides to be ready. "Listen, I hope everyone can participate in the game with a fair and honest attitude." When the players gathered around her, she solemnly reminded. While speaking, her eyes intentionally or unintentionally looked at the captain of the Slytherin team, Marcus Flint. Immediately afterwards, Madame Hooch blew the silver whistle in her hand, and the game officially began. 15 flying brooms rose from the ground at the same time and soared into the sky. At this time, commentator Lee also began his passionate commentary. "Look. The quaffle was snatched by Angelina Johnson of Gryffindor right after the start of the game. She is not only an excellent chaser, but also has a fascinating face." Lee's words were full of admiration for Angelina. "Oh, I'm not confessing, I just said what's in my heart accidentally. Of course, if she is willing to date me, Jordan." A stern shout interrupted his fantasy. "Sorry, Professor." Lee immediately stopped joking and continued to comment seriously. However, after a few words of commentary, he couldn't help talking nonsense again. Episode 72, Headshot Quirrell. Lee's witty remarks and unique commentary style influenced many players on the field. Fred was one of them. He almost couldn't help but throw the bludger at the commentary desk. Angelina was the girl he liked. "Hey, Fred, don't be impulsive." George didn't understand yet, and he loudly comforted his twin brother. "I know Lee just said bad things about me, but it doesn't matter. We will settle the score with him after the game." However, Fred didn't seem to hear George's words. His eyes were fixed on Angelina's ball. To be precise, it was the quaffle. Angelina's skills suppressed the whole field. She launched a fast break at lightning speed, scored 2 goals in a row, and easily won 20 points. Under her attack, Slytherin's goal was like the Queen of Pirates, and she could score whenever she wanted. A series of wonderful performances made Lee excited and danced. Steal. Swift attack. Perfect score. Angelina has done a great job again. Angelina has done a great job again. Slytherin must not be allowed any chance. This Gryffindor chaser has inherited the glory and tradition of Gryffindor and carried it forward. Angelina, she represents Gryffindor's profound historical heritage and indomitable fighting spirit. At this moment, she is not just fighting alone. She is not alone. The angle of this ball is tricky and impeccable. The goddess of victory has smiled at Gryffindor. Suddenly, there was a loud bang. The Gryffindor audience roared in anger. It turned out that Marcus Flint deliberately bumped into Angelina. Angelina staggered and almost fell off the broom, but she quickly stabilized her body with her extraordinary sense of balance and tenacious will. However, from her frowning brows and twisted mouth, it can be seen that the collision made her feel unbearable pain. "Fell." The little lions shouted in unison, defending Angelina. Madame Hooch severely reprimanded Flint and decisively awarded Gryffindor the opportunity to take a free kick at the goal post. "In view of the bad and blatant murder just now, Jordan." Professor McGonagall shouted in a low voice. She didn't want the situation to escalate further. Okay, I'll put it another way." Lee Jordan shrugged helplessly. "In view of the bad and blatant foul just now, Jordan, let me remind you, Flint played a dirty trick on the Gryffindor team's chaser. Anyone who encounters this kind of thing will be furious," Jordan said helplessly. In the stands, Terry Boot was still indignant. "Referee, send this B************** D off the field. Show him a red card." "Terry, get it straight, this is not a football game." Ron rolled his eyes and reminded him unhappily, "In Quidditch, there is no such thing as sending someone off the field. Oh, by the way, what is a red card?" This rule is ridiculous. Hermione interrupted indignantly, if there is no severe punishment for such malicious behavior, it is simply condoning crime. Maybe they are deliberately condoning it, so that the game will be more exciting and more interesting. Ting said indifferently. How can this be a civilized sport? Hermione simply couldn't understand this logic. Quidditch is not very civilized to begin with, Ting pointed out. That's not what's said in Quidditch Origins. Hermione retorted immediately. Come on, you can look at the positions in Quidditch. Ting finally figured out why Quidditch is like a hodgepodge. A goalkeeper is the rear commander, a seeker is a reconnaissance plane, 2 strikers are escort planes, and 3 chasers are like bombers. How come this is a wizard's air formation? I admire you the most for being able to talk nonsense seriously. Hermione was amused. Hey, stop arguing, look at Harry's broom, it seems a little wrong. Susan held up a panoramic telescope, got between the two of them, and aimed the lens at Harry. What is Harry doing? Did the golden snitch fly into the clouds? Ron muttered, looking carefully through the telescope. No one knows whether there is a golden snitch in the clouds, but Harry is about to stand shoulder to shoulder with the sun. Did you notice that Flint just bumped into Harry? Hermione recalled, maybe there was something wrong with Harry's broom. Everyone looked closely, and saw that the situation was indeed not good. Harry's broom seemed to be cast with a confusion spell, and began to twitch and twist strangely, carrying Harry gradually into the sky, away from the stadium. He could only barely hold on to not fall down. That's impossible. Susan shook her head repeatedly. The brooms used in the competition have undergone strict earthquake resistance tests. How could such a problem occur? It's really strange. Zhang Qiu also frowned and analyzed. Except for powerful black magic, ordinary collisions can't cause brooms like the Nimbus 2000 to malfunction. Could flying brooms also smoke marijuana? He half-jokingly complained, for this kind of formal competition in the school, there should be a special safety working group to ensure the safety of students, right? You think too much, Ron told him with a wry smile. The book says that few people died in the history of Quidditch games, but referees often mysteriously disappeared and were found in the Sahara Desert a few months later. Few people died, but that means some people died. Ting's face darkened, looking at Harry's current situation. I'm afraid he will soon become one of the last 10 cases. As soon as he finished speaking, Harry's flying broom began to tumble violently like crazy. Harry held the broom tightly and tried his best to keep his balance, but he was eventually thrown off. With only one hand holding the broom handle tightly, his body was suspended in the air, shaky. Oh my God! Ron exclaimed, his face instantly turned as pale as paper. Hermione eagerly snatched the telescope from Susan, but did not immediately look for Harry's figure. Instead, she anxiously searched for something in the dense crowd. Hey, aren't you looking for a landing point for Harry? Susan asked curiously. Ting, you are right, Professor Snape is innocent. Hermione did not answer her, but panted, the real Black Hand is Quirrell, look. Hermione handed the telescope to Ting. In the camera, Quirrell sat in the center of the side stands, staring at Harry with his eyes, his lips moving slightly, as if he was mumbling something. This old fox must be casting a spell on Harry's flying broom. Ron also took the telescope and said. Ting, can you use magic to interfere with Quirrell's spell? Hermione said anxiously. The kind girl didn't want anyone to die in the game. Someone has already made a move in secret, otherwise Harry would have fallen off the broom. Ting comforted. Ting looked through the telescope and found that Professor Snape was also staring at Harry and chanting spells. In terms of licking dogs, Snape is quite qualified. 0142091111 Falcon 1500133321. For the sake of the one she loves, she even tried her best to protect her son. Ting comforted, don't worry, there are so many professors on the scene. If Harry falls, they will definitely cast the floating spell in time to save him. If it doesn't work, there is still me. He added at last. In fact, at this time, Captain Wood should decisively call for a pause, and Mrs. Hooch should also find the problem in time, instead of letting Harry broom shake in the sky. This scene once again exposed Mrs. Hooch's lack of ability to deal with emergencies. But even if Harry is unlikely to get into trouble, there are still other things to worry about. Ron's face was pale. What should we do? If this goes on, Gryffindor will lose. Forget it, watch me. Ting looked at Quirrell, who had his head covered every day, and suddenly had an idea. He stood up and waved to Lynette. Lynette jumped into Ting's arms, and then his whole figure disappeared. The friends were all used to this, only Ron was shocked. At this time, the Gryffindor players surrounded Harry and tried to help him, and Marcus Flint from Slytherin took the opportunity to grab the quaffle and hit it 5 times in a row. No one noticed his little move. It must be said that Slytherin is indeed better in terms of shamelessness. Ting easily passed through the crowd and came to Professor Quirrell's kennel without anyone noticing. Just now, he suddenly had an idea and took a fancy to Quirrell's headscarf. Although Quirrell was timid, cowardly, and smelled of garlic, there was indeed a Voldemort living in the back of his head. For a long time, the back of Quirrell's head was Voldemort's only home, and this dirty garlic-smelling scarf was Voldemort's only cover. From this perspective, this scarf is quite legendary and meets the system's standards for collections. This gave him the idea of getting a Voldemort original scarf. And now Quirrell is concentrating on dealing with Harry, which is his chance. His plan is to attack Quirrell's head and see if he can get the scarf off. With Ting's ability, it is not difficult to suddenly attack Quirrell. The difficulty is how to not alert the snake and attack him without letting him notice anything unusual. Ting looked around and saw Professor Trelawney sitting nearby, and immediately had business. Because he had to deal with Voldemort, even with Lynette's cover, Ting didn't feel safe, so he found a pillar to hide behind. Then he pointed at Trelawney. In an instant, the crystal ball in Trelawney's hand suddenly flew up and hit Quirrell's head hard, breaking into countless crystal fragments. God, that's a crystal ball worth 20 galleons. Trelawney exclaimed, blurting out a word starting with F. I knew that going out today would be bad. Professor Quirrell was dizzy from the sudden heavy blow, and fell to the ground, and the spell in his mouth stopped abruptly. It seems that something happened over there in the faculty stand. Lee Jordan exclaimed. Professor Quirrell suddenly lay on the ground. Did he suddenly have a brain congestion? Or was he bitten by a vampire and now he has to transform? But this heavy blow did not make Quirrell fall completely. Ting saw the guy staggering to his feet, and his heart was in a state of mind. At this moment, he saw from the corner of his eye that the Slytherin beater was about to use a bludger to knock down Harry, who was trying to climb onto the broom. And the flying bludger was just heading towards the staff seat. It's you. Ting pointed in the direction of the bludger, and an invisible wind element force suddenly condensed, cleverly changing the flight trajectory of the bludger and constantly helping the bludger to accelerate. The bludger was like being pulled by an invisible big hand, drawing a strange arc, cleverly bypassing Harry and flying towards the stands. And it was flying faster and faster. Lee Jordan was still guessing the reason for Quirrell's abnormality, and suddenly saw the abnormal trajectory of the bludger, and hurriedly shouted, "The bludger is out of control, everyone get out of the way." Upon hearing this, other professors, nor Zhao, dodged in all directions. Only Professor Quirrell, who had just gotten up, turned his head and subconsciously looked in the direction where the crystal ball came from. His head was still dizzy when he heard Lee Jordan's reminder again, and the whistling sound of a heavy object cutting through the air. The bludger was like a precision-guided missile, hitting Quirrell's back of the head hard. The power of this big iron ball is not comparable to that of a glass crystal ball. Quirrell's body was hit by a heavy hammer, and he flew out like a kite with a broken string. His head even bounced slightly on the ground, and then he lay motionless on the ground. This time, he was completely fainted. Professor Quirrell. Hurry up, help. Shouts came one after another, and the entire stand fell into chaos. Lee suddenly shouted, "Look, everyone, Slytherin seeker Terrence Higgs seems to have found the golden snitch, and he is speeding up to catch up." Harry had just escaped from danger. Hearing this, he rode his broom without hesitation and rushed towards Terrence like a meteor. At this moment, everyone's eyes turned to the sky, and they exclaimed. Professor Zhou Luo had been temporarily forgotten. Everyone only saw him covering his mouth tightly, as if he was enduring great nausea. At the moment he landed, he spit out a ball of golden things from his mouth. "I caught the snitch," he announced loudly, raising the golden ball in his hand above his head. Golden and red fireworks exploded in the sky above the court. At this moment, the game was declared over. There are only 3 updates today. There will be 4 updates tomorrow. Episode 73, Mysterious Bounty. He didn't catch the snitch, he almost swallowed it. Flint was still indignant half an hour after the game, as if it was Harry who secretly put the quaffle into the goal, not him. Lee Jordan had already announced the result of the game with great joy. At this time, Gryffindor won with a brilliant score of 250 to 80. How should I put it? As the first Quidditch game of Hogwarts this year, this game was indeed as exciting as everyone expected. First, Angelina showed her prowess and scored goals frequently, showing her excellent skills. Then the bad boys of Slytherin tried to make personal attacks. Then Harry had a sudden illness, but he stubbornly insisted on staying on the broom, and finally he caught the golden snitch with his mouth in a very imaginative way, which brought the game to a perfect end. It can be said that Harry's debut today was perfect. However, Professor Quirrell's performance unexpectedly stole the limelight from everyone. He became the first professor with a big brain on the Quidditch field. This is not an exaggerated adjective, but a real thing that happened. Under the influence of magic, the bludger rushed around the field and it was common for players to fall off their brooms. It would be fine if ordinary students were hit, but what was shocking was that Quirrell, as a professor, was also hit by this magic ball. How poor must his magic level be to be hit? Just when everyone thought it was just an episode, proving once again that Professor Quirrell was unreliable, a dramatic scene took place. Madame Pomfrey hurried to the field to treat Professor Quirrell's injuries. However, just as the healer was about to untie Quirrell's scarf, he miraculously woke up. This was simply a medical miracle. What was even more shocking was that Professor Quirrell actually refused Madame Pomfrey's treatment. He stammered, "It's just a minor injury. It's okay. I'll go back and rest for a few days. I'll be fine." Everyone was stunned when they heard this. You know, when Professor Quirrell was hit, many people around him heard the sound of his skull cracking, and some people could even see the dent in the back of his head. He actually called such an injury a minor injury? At this moment, Professor Quirrell's image in the minds of 933 little wizards was completely overturned. He was no longer the cowardly and incompetent professor, but a tough guy. This move undoubtedly left Professor Snape, who was originally at the same level as him, far behind, and opened up the level of each other. Of course, everyone was more curious about what Professor Quirrell's head was made of. He could face such a skull crack injury so calmly. There are all kinds of speculations. Zhang Qiu told everyone that the wizards in her hometown, they call themselves Qigong masters or aliens, have a kind of magic called Iron Head skill. She had seen a group of monks before, who would hit their foreheads with bricks when they had nothing to do. Susan finally believed that Professor Quirrell's scarf was not as simple as it was made in France. It might really be a powerful magic item that offset some of his damage. Only Ting was very regretful that he could not handle the scarf this time. "I have to keep working hard." In the defense against the dark arts office, Professor Quirrell kept groaning and drinking a sip of painkiller from time to time. He felt like he was about to die. "It was all that damned beater who hit the bludger on my head. It was really terrible." Quirrell cursed in his heart. But he felt pain, and there were people who felt more pain than him. For example, the man on the back of his head. That hit him directly, or on his face. In short, this was the only face left on his body, and it was almost crushed. "Stupid guy." A sharp voice sounded, causing Quirrell to tremble involuntarily. "Quick, give me a sip of painkiller potion too," the voice ordered. Quirrell hurriedly took out the potion he had drunk and carefully handed it to the back of his head. At the back of Quirrell's head, there was a strange face hidden. Its skin was as white as chalk, its red eyes were flashing with a faint light, and below it were two snake-like slender nostrils, which looked extremely strange. What was even more horrifying was that the entire face was sunken. Although it was an improvement from the original situation where half of the head was deflated, it was still horrible. The man raised his head and drank a large mouthful of potion, but vomited it out in an instant. His face suddenly changed, and he shouted angrily, "What the hell is mixed in this potion? Why does it taste so disgusting?" Professor Quirrell shuddered all over. This bottle of potion was obviously obtained from Madame Pomfrey. Why would there be something strange added? That man gritted his teeth, resisted the temptation, and finally drank the hard-to-swallow potion completely. "Have you found out who is behind this?" The sharp voice sounded again. "Being smashed by the wizard's crystal ball, and hit by the quaffle head-on. When has this Dark Lord ever suffered such humiliation? Even when his own Avada Kedavra rebounded and turned him into what he is now, he never felt so humiliated. Master, there is no clue yet." Quirrell's voice trembled, with a crying tone. "Could it be that Dumbledore has discovered you?" "Nonsense." The face hidden behind Quirrell's head showed a cruel look. "Dumbledore, the old fool, thought I was hiding in the forest of Albania. He would never dream that I was living freely under his nose. Of course, the old fox Dumbledore must have smelled the peculiar smell on you. But I never underestimated him." The face showed a scornful smile. "But he is a conceited guy, just like me, always thinking he can control everything. Quirrell, Dumbledore will not rush to attack you. He will try every means to find out the truth behind you, who is controlling you, and who wants to get his hands on the Philosopher's Stone. His confidence will become our breakthrough. But I always feel that Snape's eyes are full of hostility when he looks at me." Quirrell couldn't help sobbing. "He is also your subordinate. Why, don't you let him help us?" "Snape?" The eyes of that face narrowed into a line, full of coldness and calculation. "Quirrell, look at me now. I am at the end of my rope, only this weak soul is left. Let alone him, even those servants who were once loyal to me may have gone to other places now. Maybe it's the patron of the mudbloods and muggles, Albus Dumbledore. The face sighed slowly, I can't tell who I can trust anymore. Otherwise, why haven't they come to find me to help me recover my strength and regroup? But, Master. Quirrell's voice was choked with sobs, my strength is too weak. I can't even resist the three-headed dog. You should consider seeking Snape's help. Why, serving me has made me, are you tired, Quirrell? At this moment, a cold atmosphere filled the office. You suggested that I contact Snape. Are you trying to take this opportunity to expose me and then go to Dumbledore to seek credit? Master. It's not like that. I'm just afraid. Quirrell defended anxiously. Don't lie to me. The hoarse voice interrupted him harshly, I know your little tricks very well, Quirrell. Are you regretting going to the forest of Albania with me? Quirrell trembled all over, but the voice of the weird face suddenly softened. He whispered in a voice that was almost whispered, don't be afraid, my loyal servant. You will be fine as long as I am here. As long as you help me get the Philosopher's Stone, I can reshape a new body and revive again. The Dark Lord will not forget those good servants who helped him in trouble. He said in a tempting tone, eternal life, what do you think of this reward? This is easy for me. Every word of Voldemort seemed to carry magic, and Quirrell showed a twisted and eager smile on his face. Voldemort felt very satisfied. Controlling people's hearts was just a piece of cake for him. Very good, go get me some unicorn blood. Only in this way can I restore my strength and protect you better. Quirrell smiled foolishly and responded, yes, Master. I have found the hiding place of the unicorn. Very good. Voldemort continued to ask, how is the progress of the herbs I want? Quirrell clenched his fists nervously, I have collected almost all of them, but I am worried that Professor Sprout may have noticed something. Don't worry, she will only think that some naughty magical creatures are playing tricks. Voldemort smiled softly, as if recalling the past, back then, I also took away the herbs quietly, and Hagrid, the big guy, could only take the blame for me. It was like this back then, and it is like this now. When mentioning Hagrid, Voldemort's eyes flashed with a hint of teasing, his cute little pets are just a piece of cake for me. When mentioning Hagrid, Quirrell thought of the ferocious three-headed dog and couldn't help shuddering. Voldemort keenly caught his fear and whispered to comfort him, don't worry, I have plenty of ways to deal with Hagrid's little pet. Speaking of which, my little brother is really as innocent and cute as ever. We will soon be able to get words out of him and find out how to subdue the three-headed dog. After hearing this, Quirrell felt relieved and nodded his head. There is one last thing. Voldemort's voice suddenly became distant, as if he was lost in some memories. I need you to get something. That is the surprise I left at Hogwarts many years ago. With it, our power will be even stronger. When Quirrell heard this, a trace of fanatical admiration flashed in his eyes. His master is always so far-sighted and always in control of everything. However, the contemptuous smile at the corner of Voldemort's mouth revealed his true thoughts. He had already prepared to give up on Quirrell. Once the stupid servant failed, the surprise would become his backhand for a comeback. He was determined to get the Philosopher's Stone. However, no matter how beautiful Quirrell's dream was, he had to face an embarrassing reality. He couldn't go out to class until the injury on his head healed. Since the Quidditch match, the little wizard seemed to have a strong interest in Quirrell's head. A little wizard who did not want to be named offered a reward of 20 galleons at the right time, rewarding any little wizard who could make Quirrell take off his scarf and expose the back of his head. 20 galleons was undoubtedly a huge sum of money for the little wizards who were not well off. Especially after the Wanyu shop became a hit in this Quidditch match. Now, all the little wizards in Hogwarts knew that the first-year genius of Ravenclaw had partnered with others to open a Wanyu shop, where they could buy all kinds of gadgets. From joke props to love potions, from space extension spell, wallets, to alchemical amulets, from Hogsmeade shopping to homework answers, everything is available. But all of this needs to be exchanged for galleons. In the past, except for the Hogsmeade open day, the little wizards had almost no place to spend money, so it didn't matter if they had more or less pocket money. But now, with the Wanyu shop as a good place to spend money, galleons suddenly became extremely precious. Everyone wants to earn this bounty. Many students waited at the door of the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom every day, hoping that Professor Quirrell would appear so that they would have a chance to make a fortune in the gold market. Unfortunately, since that competition, Quirrell seemed to have disappeared and never stepped out of the office again. The little wizards began to whisper, and some even rumored that Quirrell might have become a ghost like Professor Binns. Of course, this extravagant hope was obviously too advanced, at least 7 months. Professor Quirrell was accidentally injured, but one person was the happiest, and that was Snape, because Your defense against the dark arts professor unfortunately injured his precious brain in the fierce competition last week. In the defense against the dark arts class on Wednesday, Ting was whispering to Susan about the essentials of transfiguration in the last class, but saw Professor Snape walk in with his head held high. He waved his wand, and the black curtains and wooden boards on the wall disappeared, and the classroom suddenly became transparent. But you don't have to worry too much. Snape had a mocking smile on his lips. For Professor Quirrell, it seems that there is no difference between having a brain and not having one. Anyway, he doesn't use it much. The classroom was silent, and all eyes were focused on Snape. The students didn't expect that he would take over this course temporarily, and this news was not very exciting. Snape took a deep breath, his face showing an undisguised disgust. How do you endure attending classes in this environment filled with the smell of garlic? He waved his wand again, and all the windows opened, and the cold wind blew in, causing the students to shiver. Many students secretly complained in their hearts, "You have a big greasy head that hasn't been washed for several months, and you still have the nerve to dislike the garlic smell in the defense against the dark arts classroom?" If everyone is curious about the back of Quirrell's head under his scarf, then for Snape, they sincerely hope that he can also wear a scarf as soon as possible. Episode 74, Take off the headscarf. Where is your class going? Snape spoke lazily, his eyes falling on an annoying guy. Ting, you answer. Ting stood up, feeling embarrassed. To be honest, he didn't really know the specific progress of the course. After all, it was useless to take Quirrell's class. For Professor Quirrell and Professor Binns's classes, Ting was always late and left early. In class, he either slept or closed his eyes to laugh at the knowledge that entered his mind after collecting it, and basically didn't listen to the class. If Snape asked him about the knowledge of defense against the dark arts, he could even be more professional than Snape, but asking Quirrell about the teaching progress. Such things, who would understand? Susan, who was sitting next to him, saw Professor Snape nearby, but still carefully lowered her voice to remind Ting. Ting immediately repeated after her, "We are now learning the third episode. Professor Quirrell assigned us a recitation task this week. He asked us to recite the text introducing Grindylows and prepare to dictate it next week. Why, did Mr. Yi also hit his head in the competition and now he needs you to take care of him, Miss Bones?" Snape walked to the two of them with a stern face and sarcastically. "So helpful? Well, Hufflepuff will be deducted 5 points and Ravenclaw will be deducted 10 points. The girl with glasses, Susan, bit her lip. This was the first time she was deducted points in class. But she had learned to be strong and held back the tears in her eyes. "Okay, stop talking," Snape said impatiently. "In my opinion, your learning progress is simply a mole." He looked around the entire classroom and continued, "You waste your time on trivial matters. Half a semester has passed, but you haven't even learned the tip of the dark arts defense." He chattered and criticized Professor Quirrell's teaching progress, while pacing back and forth in the classroom, throwing all the debris left by Quirrell into the trash can, as if he would never come back. "If it were me who taught you, I would have finished learning the red hat by now. Instead of dawdling here to read the text." Professor Snape paced in the classroom, his words full of sarcasm. "I dare say that when I was 7, I knew more magic than you do now. Look at your level, you are not even as good as the ghouls in the dungeon." At this point, he changed the subject and suddenly shouted, "Now turn to page 68. Hurry up and don't waste time." Professor Snape raised his chin and said slowly, "Who can tell me what Kaba is?" "Michael Corner, tell me?" Under the guidance of Professor Quirrell, the level of the young wizard's mastery of the textbook is simply terrible. Michael hesitated for a long time, but could not answer anything. Snape was satisfied and deducted another 5 points from Ravenclaw before letting Michael sit down. Thanks to Ting's continuous increase in points, Ravenclaw's score has been quietly ranked first for a long time. Based on the relativity principle that deducting points from other colleges is adding points to yourself, Professor Snape has already focused his attack on these little eagles. TSK, if you are all at this level," Professor Snape sneered, "then I dare say that the probability of you passing this course at the end of the semester is basically 0. After finally ending the taunting, he continued, "Kappa, also known as Kappa, is a reptile aquatic magical animal. It looks like a water monkey, with a beak like a bird's beak, claws like frog feet, scales all over the body, and short hair on the top of the head, showing red. This creature mainly sucks human blood." Professor Snape's tone became more and more gloomy. "It will take advantage of people's unpreparedness and try to strangle those who wade through the pond without any defense." The little wizards wrote down these important knowledge points in a hurry. Snape threw out another question, "So, who knows where Kaba's weakness is?" "Ting, tell me." "It's the head." Ting was much calmer this time. There is a concave part in the center of Kaba's head, shaped like a plate, which is full of water. Once the water in this plate is lost, Kaba will become extremely weak. If you want to deal with Kaba, you can use cucumbers to lure them to bow, so that water will flow out from the top of their heads and make them lose their strength. After hearing this, Snape raised a disdainful arc at the corner of his mouth. This method is as clumsy as the troll catching the golden snidget. I will teach you a more efficient magic, directly attacking Kaba's head, so that they lose water instantly. I don't know how long I talked, and the bell for the end of get out of class finally rang. Snape raised his voice and announced, everyone needs to write a paper to explore ways to deal with Kaba and make its head lose water. The paper needs to fill 8 inches of parchment and be handed in to me next week. After experiencing the thrill of the defense against the dark arts course, Snape said with satisfaction, you'd better pray for Professor Quirrell, hoping that he can rest in his office and never step into this classroom again. And I will lead you to appreciate the true essence of defense against the dark arts. In short, after Professor Quirrell was seriously injured, Professor Snape finally got the job he wanted. All students could feel his excitement, and even his sarcasm during class seemed to be much less than usual. Although Professor Snape is not a good person, likes to be sarcastic and suppress students from other colleges, but to be honest, he does have real skills when teaching defense against the dark arts. However, the few magics taught by Professor Snape are all related to the brain without exception, and seem to have sinister intentions. It seems that he hopes that after Quirrell recovers, some students can use these magics and let him be hospitalized again. But it doesn't matter, teaching these is better than anything else. It is better not to teach anything. In just a few classes, the young wizards learned a lot of magic from Snape and saw dark magic creatures such as Kaba and Red Hat, which made everyone feel very excited. Unfortunately, about half a month later, Professor Quirrell finally recovered from his injury and returned to teaching. After experiencing Professor Quirrell's bad teaching style again, the young wizards realized more deeply that the difference between people is greater than that between people and dogs. If they have to choose between Quirrell and Snape, I am afraid that most students will choose the latter without hesitation. Professor Snape, although his words are sharp and always have a bit of sarcasm, he can teach something new, and the feeling of pain and happiness makes people unable to stop. Ting even wanted to say to Quirrell in his heart, I have been following you Quirrell for 3 months, but it is better to have 3 classes with Snape. With Quirrell's appearance, the bounty on the back of his head was quietly restarted, and the bounty soared to 50 galleons. Many students privately speculated that this bounty mission was secretly issued by Professor Snape. After all, as long as Professor Quirrell was injured again, he could continue to teach the defense against the dark arts class. Professor Snape did have a great motive in this matter. Especially after Quirrell came back, his temper seemed to be more irritable, and almost all students could not escape the fate of being deducted points. Ting tried to use his superb potion skills to complete Snape's task while saving medicinal materials, so as to make some money. In the past, Snape would turn a blind eye to his cleverness. After all, the potion brewed by Ting was indeed impeccable. But this time, Snape unceremoniously deducted 5 points from him for taking too many herbs from the medicine storage room. Susan tried to imitate Ting's unique way of brewing potions, but Snape also mercilessly deducted 5 points for not putting the herbs in the prescribed order. Harry was even more unlucky and was deducted the most points. Just because he rubbed his eyes, Professor Snape deducted 20 points for fatigue and neglect of eye protection. This suffocating high-pressure atmosphere made the students miserable. They had only one thought in their minds, let Professor Quirrell go quickly so that the original gentle Snape could come back. What's more, there was the reward of 50 galleons tempting them. This was not a small amount. Many adult wizards could not earn much more than that in a month's hard work. Under the temptation of this huge reward, the students were like chicken blood, showing their long-suppressed talents one after another, and all kinds of pranks emerged one after another. Gryffindor College has always been known for its bravery. Although they are far inferior to Hufflepuff students in terms of eating and being a Buddhist, they cannot be compared with Ravenclaw's Paper Kings in terms of academic performance, and they can't even compare with Slytherin in terms of the background of pure-blood families. But when it comes to the ability to make trouble, the little lions are never willing to lag behind. If they claim to be second, then no one dares to claim to be first. Whenever there is something fun, they always rush to the front, never ambiguous. Among the many Gryffindor students, the Weasley twins are the most eye-catching. Therefore, as one of the 3 evils of Hogwarts, they took the lead in firing the first shot of unveiling Quirrell's scarf and winning 50 galleons. Entering December, the weather became colder and the first snow fell from the sky. In this season of silver and snow, the twin brothers began their plan. They pretended to have a snowball fight, bewitched some snowballs, and threw them as Professor Quirrell passed by, so that they chased Quirrell around and hit him on the back of his turban. Just one ball knocked Professor Quirrell off balance. They actually secretly hid ice cubes in the snowball. Unfortunately, even the bludger couldn't break his determination to put down his turban, let alone a mere snowball. But Professor Quirrell didn't know that this was just the beginning of a series of crazy things. Several new things soon appeared on the list of goods in the Wanyu shop: dung eggs with a disgusting smell, colorful fireworks, and a sweet called refreshing bubble gum. These dung eggs and fireworks quickly became the most popular toys at the moment, and became the secret weapon of young wizards against Professor Quirrell. Especially the various dung eggs, from the smell of septic tanks, to the smell of rotting corpses, to the smell of chemical emissions. These unbearable toys were thrown into the defense against the dark arts class, one after another. As a result, the defense against the dark arts class became more and more unbearable. In class, the young wizards not only have to endure Professor Quirrell's garlic smell, but also have to face the disgusting smell of manure and eggs. This double torture is simply unbearable. And fresh bubble gum has become the new favorite of students during this special period. This mint-flavored sweet is Yi Ting's new invention. After eating one, you can blow out a bubble bigger than your head, cover your head in it, and continue to provide fresh mint-flavored air. However, this peculiar shape also makes them look a little weird, as if a goldfish bowl is placed on their heads, attracting the attention of others. The effect of bubble gum is exactly the same as the bubblehead curse, but it is more convenient. After all, young wizards in the lower grades will not use the bubblehead curse. Even among the wizards in the upper grades, there are many who are willing to pay gold coins to buy this fresh bubble gum. Compared with the ordinary air provided by the bubblehead curse, the sweet smell of mint is undoubtedly more tempting. What's even better is that beautiful patterns will appear on the bubbles blown by the refreshing bubble gum, each of which is different, which is very attractive to little wizards who love beauty and personality. Seeing that the business is so prosperous, Yi Ting is already considering launching more flavors of bubble gum, such as sweet flower flavor, dun dun peach flavor, bubble orange flavor, etc. With the protection of refreshing bubble gum, those naughty little wizards are even more unscrupulous in harassing Professor Quirrell with dung eggs. In a third-grade defense against the dark arts class, when Professor Quirrell turned around, someone took the opportunity to throw a gift mixed with dung eggs and fireworks at the podium. The flame with a suffocating stench suddenly rushed into the air and reached the coin above Professor Zhou Lu's head. The scarf was of high quality, and perhaps it was also cast with fireproof magic, so the flame only burned a small part. However, the high-temperature smoke and the stench of the dung eggs blended together, like boiling shit, and the disgusting breath instantly surrounded Quirrell tightly. At this time, George and Fred rushed forward enthusiastically to put out the fire. They picked up a basin of ice water, prepared in advance, and poured it on Professor Quirrell's head without hesitation. The fire was instantly extinguished under the impact of the ice water, and the ice water also seeped into Quirrell's head along the scarf, making him shiver and tremble all over. Professor Quirrell rushed back to the office in embarrassment and did not show up again until the bell rang for the end of Get Out of Class. 9. Episode 75, The Mastermind, Yi Ting. However, the love of pranks is not unique to Gryffindor, and the desire for bonuses is not limited to the brave little lions. The little wizards of other colleges are also eager to try and want to join this game. Compared with Gryffindor's straightforward pranks, Hufflepuff students are more low-key and restrained. They bought some special pumpkins from the Universal shop. These pumpkins were cultivated by Yi Ting with small flower buds after Halloween, cleverly disguised as Halloween decorations, and then hidden on the shelves of the defense against the dark arts classroom. When Professor Quirrell stammered and led the students to recite the text, these pumpkins quietly jumped on his head, and then gently fell down, giving him an unexpected surprise. Fortunately, the back of Professor Quirrell's head was hard enough, so he did not lose in this head-on confrontation. Some people were even more ingenious, shooting golden dye at Quirrell's head, and then releasing a niffler from Professor Kettleburn. The sniffer was like a dog smelling a toilet, jumping excitedly behind Quirrell and almost taking his precious golden scarf. The students of Ravenclaw were much more elegant. They added a special magical fuel to the fireplace, and when the fuel burned violently, the temperature of the classroom rose rapidly. The students took off their heavy clothes one after another, and Quirrell was sweating profusely and soaked all over, as if he had just been pulled out of the water. However, even so, he still wrapped the scarf tightly, fearing that he would not be able to cover the prickly heat on the back of his head. In contrast, the little snakes of Slytherin College were not so gentle. In order to make their 963 dean get what he wanted, they began to use the magic taught by Professor Snape in the defense against the dark arts class to attack Quirrell. All those magics were aimed at Quirrell, making him overwhelmed. Even Peeves joined the melee, laughing wildly, soaring over the corridor, overturning tables, pushing down statues and vases, and smashing them at Professor Quirrell. However, a professor is a professor after all. Although his face was swollen like a steamed bun, he still insisted and refused to take off his scarf, no matter what. The scarf-removing movement almost reached its climax. Without Snape, Ting resumed his habit of being late and leaving early, and quietly entered the classroom 20 minutes after the class started. In the corridor, he heard the sparse sound of reading from the classroom from afar. The little wizards were reading How to Deal with Red Hats in a Daze according to Professor Quirrell's requirements. When Ting walked into the classroom, Susan and Hannah were sitting in the last row, each wearing a bubble hood, and waved to him. Although no one threw dung eggs in the classroom during this class, the defense against the dark arts classroom seemed to be marinated with all kinds of dung eggs, and there was a bit of stench everywhere. In this environment, protective measures are particularly important. Even Ting brought one with him. Of course, he had to bring his own product. Ting walked over and sat down next to them. Wow, your bubblegum pattern is orange, so special. Hannah was sharp-eyed and noticed the difference of Ting's bubblegum. I always thought bubblegum only had cyan patterns. Where did you get this new variety? This is my newly developed bubble orange flavored fresh bubblegum. Ting smiled proudly. It's currently in the internal testing stage. Susan asked with concern, where have you been these days? You are always out of sight. Hey, it's to study this bubblegum and brew potions. Ting responded easily. Before the Quidditch game, the deposits paid by the Slytherin girls were all in place, and Ting also left Hogwarts by teleporting and went to Diagon Alley to buy magic materials. With the investment of funds, Ting also began to get busy. He planned to complete all the potion brewing work before Christmas. Expensive potions have high requirements for manufacturing skills. Neither the twins nor Hermione can help, so Ting can only do it himself. This work requires not only superb skills, but also absolute concentration and carefulness. In order to ensure that everything is foolproof, Jian chose to brew potions in the Cubeing library. What mysterious potion are you brewing? Hannah came over curiously. Love potion. Ting replied. Hannah felt an inexplicable expectation when she heard this. She couldn't help but lift her hair and asked tentatively, Ting, who are you going to use this potion on? Ting glanced at her and smiled indifferently, of course not for myself, I don't need this kind of thing yet. Hearing this answer, Hannah's expression was obviously disappointed. Oh, you want to help me test the potion, right? Ting pretended to be enlightened. What a coincidence, this is actually my first time making aphrodisiacs, and I was just looking for a little wizard to try the efficacy. Of course, the price is negotiable. We are friends, and I will definitely not treat you unfairly. Ting's God's tongue can indeed identify better potion formulas for him, but potions are different from hot pots after all, and he doesn't dare to use God's tongue to try every potion himself. Especially in the matter of aphrodisiacs, drugging others and being drugged by others, although the final results may be similar, the meanings are very different, at least in terms of posture. Hannah is indeed like many little witches, and she secretly likes Ting in her heart. But she has not been carried away yet. She shook her head firmly to express her refusal and decided not to pay attention to Ting for the whole class. Ting, as a punishment. Susan looked at her friend's actions and sighed softly. She seemed to see her own shadow in Hannah. Having such an excellent person of the opposite **X around you is indeed like a sweet poison that makes people unable to stop. But falling in love with someone who is too dazzling is sometimes an unspeakable distress. Fortunately, she could feel that this person's attitude towards her and Hannah was somewhat different. Finally, in the long and dull recitation of the text, this defense against the dark arts class finally came to an end. Perhaps it was because the little wizards of Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff didn't like to make trouble. Perhaps it was because the frequent failures before made the little wizards lose patience. In short, no one tried to play a prank on Professor Quirrell throughout the class, and he was finally able to finish the class with peace of mind. Professor Quirrell finally announced that the next class would be to recite the text, and then turned and left without any defense. Just before he left the classroom, Ting took off his tricorn hat and pulled out a beetle, the size of a red date. The beetle shone with golden light, and the carapace on its back gently unfolded in Ting's palm, revealing a crystal inlaid on its abdomen, emitting a faint blue light. If you look closely, you will find that this is not a real beetle, but an exquisite clockwork mechanical beetle. More precisely, it is a microparticle detection unit. This is the smallest model in the clockwork mechanical series, developed by Ting. The blue crystal is not only its energy core, but also its status indicator light. Red indicates energy consumption, and blue indicates sufficient energy. Although it is small in size, it has all the necessary functions. In addition to its excellent detection ability, the overall performance of this sub-detection unit is no different from that of a large beetle, and it is even better in terms of mobility. With a light push from Ting, the clockwork beetle flapped its wings and flew rapidly in the direction where Professor Quirrell left. He was finally ready to take action himself. In fact, the driving force behind the wave of activities to take off Quirrell's turban during this period was Ting. He was the one who released the news, and of course he also provided the bounty. In addition, he personally went to the stage to provide various ammunition for the little wizards through the Wanyu shop, in order to create a lively atmosphere of participation by all the people and scrambling to take off the turban. In this way, he could use the little wizards to test and fish in troubled waters to prepare for his own actions. At this point, no matter who took off Quirrell's turban, he would only be regarded as a member of a collective prank. But if he took off Professor Quirrell's turban for no reason, he would definitely be considered to know something. If he was targeted by Voldemort like this, it would be bad. Even if Voldemort could only survive now, he could be resurrected infinitely after all. Ting didn't want to be watched by something in the dark all the time. After all, there is only a thief who can steal for 1,000 days, but there is no such thing as a thief who can guard against thieves for 1,000 days. After this period of experimentation, Ting has fully understood the properties of the head coin. This turban should be enchanted, which can prevent the influence of general magic and can easily resist the influence of conventional magic such as floating spell and flying spell. Using fire and water to burn it is not possible. The turban is obviously fireproof, and for other methods, as long as Quirrell is willing to endure, he cannot take off the scarf. Since magic attacks are useless, physical attacks can only be used. It would definitely not work to go up and rob it yourself. Not to mention that it is too unskilled. With Quirrell and Voldemort's vigilance, it is impossible to stab him quietly. Ordinary transfiguration or owls will not work either. Voldemort seems to have mastered the method of sensing life force or soul. Even if he is targeted by the Niffler or the owl, he can block it in time as if he has eyes in the back of his head. Ting summarized the 3 key factors for successfully taking off Quirrell's turban. Physical means must be used, the action must be silent, and the executor must be an inanimate being. After screening through this series of harsh conditions, he found that only the clockwork mechanical insects he studied were the most suitable for this task. Clockwork machines, although driven by magic, can carry out physical attacks. They are small in size, which is convenient for concealed actions. More importantly, they are not real life forms and can perfectly avoid Voldemort's sensing. Sure enough, when the microparticle detection unit flew over Quirrell's head, he still did not find anything abnormal. The clockwork beetle slowly landed, 6 slender legs tightly clasped the turban, and then, suddenly took off. Professor Quirrell felt a lightness on his head before he could react, and it took a while before he realized that his turban had been taken away. However, when the students stared at the head exposed under the turban with expectation, they were greatly disappointed. In the sun, the head was bald, nothing else. The most shocking thing was Ting. He then realized that Voldemort, who was hiding behind Quirrell's head, had actually slipped away. In fact, it was not surprising that things would develop like this. Who made Ting make such a big noise? Being attacked so frequently and fiercely by the little wizards, Professor Quirrell was also a temper, and naturally had the urge to fight back, wanting to show his strong personal strength and dissolve these clumsy attacks. However, he has always been portraying a stuttering and non-threatening image in the outside world. For half a semester, he was like a waste in everyone's eyes. Now suddenly counterattacking, wouldn't it expose his true strength and attract Dumbledore's attention? But such blind tolerance, it is not a long-term solution. At least Voldemort has had enough of this endless harassment and attacks. He hit on the back of Quirrell's head and received more beatings in the past month than in the past half-century. He, Voldemort, has no face left? However, since he could neither fight back nor tolerate this continuous harassment, Voldemort decided to leave Quirrell after careful consideration and continue to hide in the school as a wandering spirit. Due to the existence of Dumbledore, he could not afford to offend these students, but could he not hide? Regardless of whether Voldemort was exposed or not, Ting was so happy that he won. As soon as he got the garlic-smelling Voldemort's original headscarf, Ting couldn't wait to throw it into the system collection space, fearing that it would be contaminated with something strange. But he was sure of one thing. This collection, as he expected, fully met the system's requirements. The cold and mechanical voice of the system sounded in his mind, "Ding! Congratulations to the host for collecting Voldemort's headscarf, and the reward is the Eye of God, Corvus. After all this time, it's Fiscal's Eye of God. Yi Ting looked at the purple crystal bead that suddenly flashed in his hand, and couldn't help but smile bitterly. How to say it, this thing is really good as a reward. The Eye of God, which one is not mysterious, is infinitely powerful. The fact that it can be cast silently without a wand without a threshold is enough to attract all wizards. After all, even Dumbledore can't cast any spell silently without a wand. But the Eye of God can. However, for Yi Ting, who already has 4 God's Eyes, including 1 God's Eye of Thunder, this new God's Eye seems a bit awkward. The second-year talent of the Princess of Judgment is meaningless to him, and the Thunder of Sheensai and the Lord of Night Crows can't bring much substantial improvement to his combat power. Oh, forget it, keep it for now. Yi Ting thought to himself, maybe I can give it to others as a reward in the future? Episode 76, Clockwork Machinery, Dumbledore's Invitation. In fact, even without this God's Eye, Yi Ting also reaped a lot of rewards this time. The arms sold through this incident alone made his Wanyu shop earn a lot of money. Sales soared, breaking through the 500 galleon mark in one fell swoop. Think about George and Fred enduring the unpleasant smell and working hard to make that pile of dung eggs. Now it seems that everything is worth it. But what about the cost? Yi Ting's investment is actually very small. In addition to the cost of producing goods, what he did was just quietly spreading some rumors. Even the bounty of 50 galleons was accurately recovered by him. It was a gnat, and it was not cheap for outsiders. Of course, in addition to the material harvest, Yi Ting also gained in reputation. When he took off Professor Quirrell's turban, he had once again become a hero of Hogwarts. After all, he completed this challenge that left everyone helpless. In the following days, young wizards who failed in the turban lifting challenge kept coming to congratulate Yi Ting on his success. Amazing! You really did it. You actually got the turban. In the auditorium, at the shareholders' meeting of the Wanyu shop, George's praise for Yi Ting was overflowing with words. Fred shook his head and sighed. It seems that the title of our King of Hogwarts pranks belongs to you this time. George recalled the glorious years of the past. Back then, we fought for 3 whole years to win this title. Fred smiled bitterly and added, you have been in Hogwarts for less than a semester, and you have already surpassed us. Being teased by the twins, Yi Ting shook his head helplessly. Forget it, you should keep this title. I never wanted it. Hey, by the way, do you know who is the poster behind this bounty? Zhang Qiu asked mysteriously. I only know that the bounty notice seemed to have mysteriously appeared on the bulletin board in the Ravenclaw common room overnight. It happened about a week ago. The strange thing is that no one saw how it was posted. It's the same for us Hufflepuffs. After listening to Zhang Qiu's words, Susan suddenly thought of something, and a trace of worry flashed across her face. I remember that our bounty appeared at the same time, and no one knew what was going on either. Gryffindor seemed to have discovered it that day as well. Hermione thoughtfully said, I guess, the same is true for Slytherin. George and Fred exchanged a puzzled look. Who has the ability to put the notice in the common rooms of 4 colleges at the same time overnight, and it is not discovered? Several people pondered and racked their brains, but they still couldn't figure out how it was done. Could it be that, as those people outside speculated, the reward was actually issued by the old bat? George guessed half-jokingly. I think, even if it is not Professor Snape, it is likely to be another professor. Yi Ting analyzed seriously. After all, each lounge has an access control system. Except for the professor, who can quietly enter and exit all the lounges overnight. In fact, the real answer is very simple. Just use the clockwork beetle. Yi Ting made a careful plan. He told Lynette to hide the clockwork beetle and the bounty order with preset instructions in the corners of each dormitory during the day. In the middle of the night, the clockwork beetles quietly started up, quietly posted the bounty notice on the bulletin board of each college lounge when no one was around, and then hid themselves. The next day, Lynette sneaked into the 4 lounges without anyone noticing and collected them. With this plan, Yi successfully issued a bounty without telling anyone. At least his friends racked their brains, but couldn't figure it out. Finally, Zhang Qiu simply gave up and looked at Yi Ting. Forget it, we'll just keep an eye on you when the time comes. Unless the mastermind is going to default on the debt and refuse to pay, he will always show up. Right. What a good idea. The twins praised. But Yi Ting shook his head. Tell me, is there a possibility that since the mastermind has the ability to post notices on the bulletin boards of the 4 lounges overnight, he is also capable of sending the bounty to my bedside overnight? Hearing this, Zhang Qiu couldn't help but laugh awkwardly. This is indeed possible. Alas, analyzing here, he got into a dead end again. Compared with the mysterious publisher behind the bounty order, Hermione is obviously more interested in the use of the clockwork used by Yi Ting. This clever little witch is always full of curiosity about new things. Well, Yi Ting, Hermione's face flushed slightly, and she said shyly, "Can I see your big bug?" Yi Ting couldn't help but widen her eyes when she heard this request, and looked at her in shock. "What did you say just now?" "I just want to see your big bug." Hermione carefully repeated her request. "I just want to take a look and touch it. I will be very careful and will never damage it. I promise." "I want to see it too." And me. Zhang Qiao and Susan also responded. Even the twin brothers were aroused by their interest. "Now, do you want to see it now?" Yi Ting was a little embarrassed now. "Why don't we find a private place and come one by one? Although this big bug is still in its infancy, it can be used initially, so it doesn't hurt to show it." Alas, these girls are they have to ask for this in front of so many people. "And you, two grown men, why are you joining in the fun?" "Oh, it's so troublesome to come one by one." Hermione rolled her eyes and suggested, "Why don't we all watch it together? We can also play together and discuss it in depth." "What? Watching together is not exciting enough? You even have to play together and discuss it in depth?" "Oh, I didn't expect you to be like this, Hermione. What about the rest of you? Don't you feel awkward doing this kind of thing with others?" Looking at the girls' expectant eyes, Yi Ting couldn't help but sigh that girls nowadays are really open-minded. "So, let's start now?" Yi Ting asked tentatively, while cautiously reaching for her trousers. "Can you move faster?" Zhang Qiu urged. "I have never seen a mechanical beetle that can fly by itself." Yi Ting looked at her in surprise. "Are you talking about my clockwork beetle?" "What else?" Zhang Qiu gave her a puzzled look. "Do you have any other bugs hidden?" "Okay." Yi Ting took out the beetle from his trouser pocket with some disappointment and placed it in front of them. Watching them playing with the beetle happily, Yi Ting felt an inexplicable sense of loss in his heart. Alas, he thought something more exciting would happen. Several people surrounded the clockwork beetle, as if they had found the most interesting toy. They kept commanding the beetle to fly between them, commanding it to make various movements, playing happily and laughing constantly. Although they have seen many magical items, this kind of machine that can move as flexibly as a living beetle is the first time they have seen it. According to Hermione, it is more magical than a robot. "Where did this clockwork beetle come from?" Hermione asked Yi Ting after letting the beetle fly from her palm. Yi Ting smiled and took out a bunch of clockwork parts from his tricorn hat. "I made this myself. It combines alchemy and muggle machinery." As he spoke, he picked and chose among the parts. In a blink of an eye, a brand new clockwork beetle was born in his hands. "Is this how it is made?" "It's amazing." Susan was amazed, with admiration for Yi Ting in her eyes. "Since they are all assembled with parts, Yi Ting, can you use these parts to build other types of clockwork mechanisms?" George asked curiously. "Of course." Yi Ting nodded and smiled. "As long as there are enough parts, I can assemble any mechanism you want." "Great." Fred clapped his hands excitedly. "I think we can use these clockwork mechanisms to make many interesting props, such as arms that can automatically grab things. Everyone will definitely be willing to buy them." This is not difficult." Yi Ting agreed with his idea, but the cost of clockwork parts is still quite high. "Before I find a way to reduce costs, these clockwork products may only exist as luxury goods." In fact, Yi Ting has long wanted to promote clockwork machinery. On the one hand, compared with other products, clockwork machinery is his exclusive product, which belongs to Wanyu shop, and can be used as a signature feature of the shop. On the other hand, he hopes to gradually integrate clockwork machinery into this magical world in this way. Maybe, like the Industrial Revolution in the Muggle world, he can lead a revolutionary magic revolution here. Since he has come to this world, how can he not bring some changes to the world? As the founder of this system, connections, wealth, and fame will automatically gather around him. Although Yi Ting is confident that as long as he keeps collecting collections, he will become the strongest person in the world sooner or later. But there are more ways to gain influence than just fighting and killing. Researching new results and bringing changes to the world is also a good way, and there won't be too much trouble. The reason why Harry and others were gagged and the existence of Unit 01 was not announced before was because Unit 01 was too powerful and too dangerous. As a clockwork machine's debut in this world, it is easy to make people afraid. But the clockwork beetle is different. It is harmless and docile, just the right product. Soon, there was a striking new product on the list hanging in the lounge of each college in the Wanyu shop: clockwork beetle. The ingenuity of the genius of Ravenclaw, your right-hand assistant in daily life. It was this magical beetle that helped Yi Ting easily take off Professor Quirrell's turban and won a generous bounty of 50 galleons. Now, it can also be your partner, and the price is only 30 galleons. To be honest, the cost of this little beetle is only 5 galleons, and Ting also deliberately dismantled its detection device as a microsubstance detection unit. It can be said that apart from being an obedient beetle, it has no other functions, and selling it for 30 galleons is really flashy. But with the help of Professor Quirrell's turban incident, it quickly became the new darling of Hogwarts. In just a few days, 7 or 8 wealthy buyers have bought this little gadget from Ting. Ting even found that one of the orders came from the principal's office. Not long after, Ting received a letter from Dumbledore. Dear Ting, your alchemical work has arrived in my hands. I can't believe that you, so young, can create such an amazing work. It is simply creating a new system. Please allow me, an old man, to express my excitement. From your little toy, I seem to see a brand new 980 future waving to us. This afternoon, can you come to my principal's office and spend a leisurely afternoon tea time with me? Yours faithfully, Albus Dumbledore, and I like strawberry mousse. Sure enough, my little invention attracted Dumbledore's attention. From the scribbled strokes in the letter, we can see Dumbledore's excitement at the time. Ting had already prepared for this, and it could even be said that he had planned it for a long time. He knew that if he wanted to become famous in the magic world with this little thing, Dumbledore would undoubtedly be a shortcut. After all, Dumbledore was the most powerful white wizard in Europe, and his influence in the magic world was unmatched. More importantly, he knew countless outstanding wizards, potion masters, alchemists, and scholars. With his introduction, Ting could save a lot of time. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon of that day, Ting appeared at the entrance of the principal's office on time. A low voice suddenly sounded, "Password." It turned out that a huge ugly stone beast was guarding the principal's office, and it was looking at Yeely with its gloomy eyes. Strawberry mousse. After hearing this, the stone beast jumped aside with satisfaction, revealing a secret passage leading to the principal's office. Ting stepped onto the automatic rotating escalator behind the stone beast, and as the escalator slowly rose, he came to the door of the principal's office at the top. A shiny oak door came into view, decorated with a brass door knocker in the shape of a sphinx. Ting could feel the powerful magic fluctuations from this door knocker. Obviously, this was a very good magic prop. If a wizard tried to force his way into the door, this door knocker would transform into a ferocious griffin and attack. Griffins are frequent visitors to the magical world. This kind of magical beast is very powerful. According to the records of the Ministry of Magic, it is classified as a 5x level, and its strength is comparable to that of a fire dragon. Of course, this refers to the fire dragon in the Harry Potter world. Ting thought of Ravenclaw's eagle ring, which probably has similar functions. Ting couldn't help but sigh that Hogwarts is indeed profound. These 2 door knockers alone are enough to show their preciousness. This level of alchemical items is still impossible to produce for his current alchemical level. I believe that it is also a good collection in the system. In fact, as early as the door of the Ravenclaw lounge, Ting had the idea of picking the door knocker. Unfortunately, he couldn't pick it. After all, Dumbledore is still alive. Ting thought, if Dumbledore died one day, and he took over as the headmaster of Hogwarts, wouldn't he be able to collect anything he wanted? Episode 77, Praise from Nicholas Flamel. The door knocker opened gently, and Ting stepped into the principal's office. This was his second time here, but unlike the last time he was teleported in from the restricted corridor, this time he entered through the main entrance. There were still a lot of silverware and books in the office. As soon as he walked in, the portraits of the past Hogwarts principals hanging on the wall seemed to be injected with life, and they woke up from the paintings one by one. Last time they had been pretending to sleep in the frame, but now they all stared at Ting curiously. After 2 looks, he doesn't look special, right? Said a female netizen with an exaggerated pleated lace collar. Ting saw the name under the frame, Elizabeth Burke. He knew this person. She was a witch in the Elizabethan era. Like Phineas, she was a cold-blooded Slytherin and a pure-blood supremacist. Humph, don't be silly, a witch in green clothes snorted disdainfully. Dumbledore said that this kid is different and must have his own strengths. 1. Yes, I can feel the special breath of this child. Armando Dipet interrupted excitedly. You are just a painting, what do you know? Elizabeth said mockingly. Humph, don't underestimate us people in the paintings. In our era, people who believed in feelings often lived better than those who didn't believe. Another witch said. Oh? Are you proud of losing to Peeves? Elizabeth fired at full power. The portraits of the principals argued in front of Ting as if they had forgotten his existence. Only one witch with an elegant figure and a dignified look nodded slightly to Ting. Professor Dumbledore asked you to wait here for a moment. Ting nodded to indicate that he understood. However, in a portrait next to him, Phineas Black, wearing a Slytherin silver-green school robe, snorted with disdain. When I was in charge of Hogwarts, his words were full of contempt, a piece of mud. He seemed to want to spit out an insulting word, but the other headmaster portraits looked at him sideways, so he had to clear his throat awkwardly and changed his words. How can a wizard from a Muggle family be worthy of stepping into the headmaster's office of Hogwarts, and twice? Phineas, if you speak without restraint again, be careful and I will let you know how powerful I am. A wizard with a red nose glared at him with a warning tone. Phineas was obviously used to this kind of threat. Although he restrained himself a little, he still stubbornly insisted on his own opinion. I'm just telling the truth. That's just because you are ignorant. A irritable witch yelled at him, choosing you as the successor principal was my biggest mistake. Yi Ting's eyes fell on the text below the portrait, and he learned that the female netizen was Phineas's former principal, Eupraxia Moore. Phineas was obviously afraid of Eupraxia. He subconsciously touched his nose bridge, then silently retreated to a corner of the portrait and said no more. Euphrasia turned to face Yi Ting, with a gentle and kind smile on her face. He didn't know before that the principals were so interesting now. It is not difficult to understand why these principals pay so much attention to Yi Ting. After all, Professor Dumbledore rarely invites students to step into the principal's office, let alone visit twice in a semester. As the principals quieted down, Yi Ting was finally able to calm down and look at the room. The mirror of Ariste in the room has been moved into the restricted area, revealing what was hidden behind the mirror at that time. For example, a stone round basin. An ancient stone round basin is quietly placed on a high stool. It is a meditation basin, a magical prop that can store and reproduce memories. Just immerse your head in the basin and you can feel those memories. This is not only a precious magic item, but also an excellent systematic collection. On the perch behind the door, Professor Dumbledore's pet phoenix fox stood elegantly. It seemed to notice Yi Ting's gaze, glanced at him lightly, and then shook its gorgeous tail wings, as if to greet him. Phoenix is a very rare magical creature. Only 2 appeared in the original book. I believe that if you collect it, you will definitely get a very formal reward. Yi Ting felt that this room was like a huge treasure house. Every item he saw seemed to be worth collecting. He wanted to collect them all. About 5 minutes later, Dumbledore finally appeared in the principal's office. Mr. Yi Ting, please take a seat. Dumbledore smiled and blinked, and greeted him enthusiastically. Come, try the chocolate milk first. It's sweet but not greasy. I personally like it very much. As he spoke, Dumbledore gently waved his wand and tapped the table. Instantly, the table was filled with a dazzling array of delicacies. In addition to the chocolate milk just mentioned, there was also a plate of attractively colored candies, a bunch of cockroaches, and a few pieces of strawberry mousse mentioned in the secret code just passed. Don't be shy, child, you must be thirsty. Professor Dumbledore kindly handed a large bottle of chocolate milk to Yi Ting. Yi Ting nodded gently in thanks, and then took a sip of the drink. The sweet and warm taste seemed to melt the winter cold and reach the bottom of his heart. Then, Dumbledore took out the clockwork beetle. This is really an amazing work, Yi Ting. Dumbledore praised sincerely, you have only been at Hogwarts for less than half a year, and you can have such creativity and inventions. It is really amazing. You are better than I thought, and you are worthy of being a student of Ravenclaw. No, it's just my little idea. It's no big deal. Yi Ting modestly pointed to the universe. No, it's not just a little idea. Dumbledore looked very sincere. You may not realize that your little invention may lead a revolution in the magic world. Some people even said that it's not too much for you to get 10 Merlin badges for this. This is what an old friend of mine said about you. No, Yi Ting understood this very well, because this little invention itself came from a simple result of a discipline that has brought about earth-shaking changes in a certain country. But Yi Ting was curious about another thing. Your friend is Nicholas Flamel. You should be familiar with this name. Dumbledore smiled and revealed the answer. Of course, the greatest alchemist in the world, the inventor of the Philosopher's Stone, and the longest-lived wizard today, is said to be more than 600 years old. To be exact, it's 664 years old. Dumbledore added, but I'm glad to be friends with Nick. Speaking of this, Dumbledore smiled, but I didn't ask you to come here today to talk about his brilliant achievements. In fact, I sent your little invention to Nico, and he admired your achievements more than I did, and even tried to imitate you. Unfortunately, he failed. As he said, Dumbledore pushed the beetle in his hand forward. Yi Ting took the beetle and immediately found the problem keenly. Although the clockwork beetle in front of him looked exactly like his own product, there were still many differences in details. More importantly, after peeling off its carapace, Ting did not see the blue magic crystal, nor did he find any traces of magic engraved by himself. All this shows a truth: it is not his work, but a replica, and it is most likely made by Nick Flamel. Ting let it fly again and roughly understood the performance of the replica. The function is the same as Ting's clockwork beetle, but without the magic crystal, the endurance is very worrying, and the intelligence is not high, so it is stupid to perform tasks. If Ting's clockwork beetle is also at this level, he will not let them help him issue a bounty order in 4 colleges. However, even so, Ting has to admit that Nicholas Flamel is worthy of being the greatest alchemist. Ting has only released the clockwork beetle product for less than a week, and Dumbledore bought it for less than 3 days, plus the time it takes for the owl to send the letter back and forth. That is to say, Nicholas Flamel made a replica within a day of seeing his own work. Ordinary alchemists can't even completely disassemble the clockwork beetle in this time. But when Ting expressed his admiration, Dumbledore shook his head. In fact, both Nico and I feel that this imitation is a failure because he did not imitate the most critical performance of this beetle at all. Dumbledore sighed. More importantly, in order to achieve the same performance, the materials he used in the manufacturing process are too expensive, and the magic he cast is also very difficult. In other words, if he were to make this kind of toy, he would not be able to keep the cost below 30 galleons. After that, Dumbledore looked at Ting with admiration. This is what we think is the most amazing thing about you. You can sell this beetle for 30 galleons, which means your cost is lower, right? The biggest benefit of the Industrial Revolution in the Muggle world is that it infinitely reduces the cost of various tools. Whether it is mass-produced products or the machines themselves. The steam engine of 1700 AD could actually be made by hand in 170 AD by organizing a group of the top craftsmen at the time. But that's all. This kind of handmade steam engine is too expensive and not replicable at all, let alone mass production. Compared to the various magical creations in the magic world, the biggest advantage of clockwork machinery is its low cost. That's right. Seeing Dumbledore asking this question, Ting gave a straightforward answer. Dumbledore would not do business with him anyway. In fact, the cost price of a clockwork beetle is 3 galleons. The cost of a complete microdetection subunit is 5 galleons, but if the precision detector is replaced with an ordinary detector and the real-time signal transmission device is not installed, its cost will be reduced. In addition, after removing important components, the weight of the body is reduced, and the requirements for flight load and other aspects are also reduced, which can be further reduced. After 7 or 8 reductions, the cost is reduced to 3 galleons. Dumbledore opened his mouth, but said nothing. He thought the cost of this clockwork beetle would be very low, but he never thought that the cost would be so low. If this cost can make a clockwork beetle, then the alchemical machine invented by Yipung is really more amazing than he imagined. But on the other hand, this little wizard genius is really a genius, but he is also really black-hearted. He dares to sell it at the cost price, by adding a 0. This is not an ordinary profiteer. At this moment, Dumbledore and the principals behind him looked at Ting with particularly complicated expressions. You can't judge a person by his appearance. 13x 13x. Dumbledore broke the brief silence. He did not intend to directly comment on Ting's business behavior, but turned the topic to the field of alchemy. In short, Nico was very impressed after seeing your work, and he also specially entrusted me to pass a letter to you. I think you should be able to become good friends. As he said, he stuck a yellowed parchment to Ting. In the following time, Ting and Dumbledore had an in-depth exchange on clockwork machinery and related alchemy technology. Dumbledore's curiosity was greatly satisfied, and Ting was also happy to share his insights and experiences, and received a lot of advice from Dumbledore. Until it was getting dark, the conversation came to an end. As soon as Ting left the principal's office, the portraits of Lee, who had been silent, became active and enthusiastically discussed what they had just witnessed. Is that boy really that powerful? A wizard with a full beard broke the silence first. He frowned and obviously had doubts about what he had just seen. I still can't believe that you can praise him so much just for an alchemical product. The name Quentin Trimble was engraved on the frame. He was an expert in defense against the dark arts. His book Dark Arts, A Guide to Self-Defense was a textbook for 1st to 4th graders at Hogwarts. His speech and behavior are not like a 12-year-old child. Mrs. Antonia Crisworth interrupted elegantly, at least when I was 11, I was not as good at business as he was. Principal Dumbledore smiled slightly, and a strange light flashed on his glasses. Mr. Ting is indeed very smart, and quite special. His talent in the field of magic is the first time I have ever seen it in my life. I felt that this kid was not right since the last time I saw him. Phineas Black said bluntly. Oh? This makes me curious, Phineas, why don't you like that kid either? Deli's Devante raised her thick wand made of birch branches, with a hint of threat in her tone. Is it because he is a muggle-born? Phineas yawned, pretending to be just woken up, rubbing his eyes. Ah? What did I say just now? Why don't I remember? He obviously didn't want to continue this topic, because it might be disadvantageous to him. Episode 78, Legendary Material Provider Hagrid. That child's magical talent is indeed amazing, and he is talented. Such a person should not be a muggle wizard. Elizabeth, who had previously questioned Ting, could not help but say. He is indeed a muggle wizard, Elizabeth. Dumbledore confirmed calmly, but I have a hunch that the reason why he awakened magic is probably very different from that of ordinary muggle wizards, even, to some extent, close to those ancient wizards. Ancient wizards? Do you also believe in that ridiculous theory of God's gift? A male wizard with curly hair who was busy making potions looked up in surprise. If you ask me, the theory of hybrids of magical creatures is the real truth. Elizabeth immediately retorted, oh, come on, Wenruadian, I don't believe that our magic comes from those beasts. Do you think your great-great-great-grandfather was a goblin? Phineas Black also joined in the booing, loudly echoing Elizabeth. That's much better than the vague theory of divine gift. Windic Wenridian shouted excitedly. Seeing that the headmasters were about to quarrel over the classic question of the origin of wizards' magic, Dumbledore hurriedly coughed dryly, trying to calm the dispute. To be honest, it doesn't matter where his talent comes from, Dumbledore said, it doesn't change the fact that he is a rare magical genius. It's rare to hear you use the word genius to describe a person. Wenridian said. Dumbledore, you don't mean to say that the child may become the next you, right? There was a hint of subtle sarcasm in Phineas' tone, a griffin with both wisdom and courage? No, Mr. Ting's potential is probably above mine. Dumbledore expressed his praise for Ting without hesitation. Haha, this is simply the funniest joke I have ever heard in this century. Phineas covered his stomach and laughed exaggeratedly. However, apart from his laughter, no one in the principal's office said a word, which made Phineas feel a little bored, and gradually, his laughter subsided. Mr. Ting's research in the field of alchemy has surpassed too many people. Dumbledore sighed, and Nicholas Flamel's high evaluation of Ting in the letter emerged in his mind. 897. This child is destined to become a person who changes the magic world. On the other hand, Ting didn't know what kind of discussion he had caused among the principals. He stepped out of the door of the principal's office and couldn't wait to open the letter. On the letterhead, vigorous handwriting came into view. To the respected Mr. Ting, hello, I am Nicholas Flamel. Perhaps you have heard of my name. Not long ago, I received a clockwork beetle from Professor Dumbledore. Its exquisite alchemical skills and unique magic pattern design made me, an old alchemist, admire it. I am sincerely pleased that the magic world has a rising star like you. However, some of the exquisite structures in the beetle are difficult for me to understand, such as... Followed by a long list of obscure academic discussions. I beg you to satisfy the curiosity of a man over 600 years old and solve my doubts. With great respect, Nick Flamel. P.S. The method of replying is attached to the letter. The way to send back is actually a somewhat complicated magic pattern. This may be a small test for his friends by the alchemist master. Those who cannot pass the test cannot make love with him at all. Of course, this is also his way to protect his privacy. After all, as a true master like him, a living legend, as long as he stays on the earth for a day, there will be countless admirers or speculators who want to find him, ask him questions, get his autograph, etc. He has to use this method to live a quiet life. But this little problem is not difficult for Ting. He easily cracked the magic pattern and returned to the dormitory to write a long letter to Nicholas Flamel. He not only answered all the questions about clockwork machinery in the letter in detail, but also shared several confusions he encountered in the process of alchemy research. In terms of academics, he is happy to communicate with the masters of this world. After writing the letter, Ting prepared to find the school owl to send the letter, and go to the Forbidden Forest to find Hagrid. The time he and Hagrid agreed was in the afternoon. If he hadn't been delayed for too long at Dumbledore's place, he would have come back long ago. I don't know if it will delay dinner. Before leaving the common room, he saw the board Chong Chiu. Today is the weekend, and there is no Quidditch training in the afternoon. The little wizard who was squeezed out in the hood revealing operation has not provided too many orders recently. So the girl suddenly felt bored. If it were usual, before joining the Wanyu shop, she would often encounter such situations and never find it strange. But after joining the Wanyu shop, Zhangqiu deeply understood the truth that time is money. As a result, now that he has nothing to do, he feels that he has lost a lot. Seeing Yi Ting, the girl's expression became visibly happy. Yi Ting, I remember you went to the principal's office before, she waved and asked gossipingly, what did you talk about? Yi Ting said, we talked about the clockwork beetle. Professor Dumbledore also placed an order with our shop. By the way, he also handed me a letter from Nicholas Flamel. Oh, so Dumbledore also bought your clockwork beetle. Zhangqiu's eyes lit up when he heard it, this is big news. I have to write it down and use it in our advertising slogan. As for Nicholas Flamel, she completely ignored him. After recording the news, Zhangqiu asked curiously, where are you going now? To find Hagrid, Yi Ting said casually, he said there is a batch of fresh materials waiting for us, Susan and I are going to get it. Are you coming too? He invited casually, do you want to go with me? Of course. Zhangqiu agreed without hesitation, I'm worried about having nothing to do, it's just right to go with you. In the hallway, they met Susan Bones, who had been waiting for a long time. In fact, like Zhangqiu, she had no impression of the name Nicholas Flamel. After sending the letter, the group went to Hagrid's hut with great interest. I saw Hagrid sitting by the tree stump in front of the door, concentrating on adjusting an ancient and huge compound bow. In the eyes of others, the bow was like a freak that combined violence and art. The bow was very tall, almost taller than Susan, and it looked that its power was underestimated. Aha, Yi Ting, you are finally here. Please take a seat. Hagrid greeted them warmly. Yi Ting nodded slightly, waved his wand gently, and the branches on the ground instantly turned into 4 exquisite chairs. After the 3 sat down, Yi Ting asked casually, Hagrid, do you still like this gift? I like it. I like it very much. Hagrid smiled like a child weighing more than 600 pounds, innocent and warm, I have never been so happy. Although Hagrid's wand was secretly hidden in his pink umbrella, his magic was a bit lame, so he preferred to use his big bow. Yi Ting had seen Hagrid's bow, which was an ordinary metal bow, and the bowstring was also made of ordinary cowhide bands. In general, except for being big and hard, there was no special feature. So, he gave the slingshot, rewarded by the system, to Hagrid. Of course, the slingshot was not the kind of slingshot made of a Y-shaped tree branch, but a bow with full elasticity from the continent of Teyvat, which was especially powerful when shooting at close range. With Hagrid's amazing strength, if he pulled the bow to its full length, the arrows he shot could easily penetrate the armor of an armored vehicle, not to mention the shells of those magical creatures. Hagrid couldn't let go of the bow, his eyes full of surprise and gratitude. This is too expensive, Yi Ting. This bow is indeed very expensive. Hagrid has never seen the material of the bow, but he only knows that it is a kind of wood that looks expensive. Its appearance is also very delicate, and every detail shows the craftsman's ingenuity. What's more amazing is that it also contains powerful magical power. After all, this is a 3-star weapon in the Teyvat continent. Perhaps in the game world, such a weapon is not uncommon to players, but in the real world, it is the top standard weapon that ordinary people can access. More advanced ones are all magical weapons that can write legends in history. Oh, by the way, Hagrid suddenly said as if he remembered something, are you here to get materials? I still have a lot of magic materials in my house. If you need them, just take them. Don't be polite. Hagrid has a lot of rare materials from the Forbidden Forest, such as unicorn hair, enough to weave carpets. However, he rarely sells these treasures. Most of them are just piled up in the house casually, or some are used to make a doghouse for Yaya. Yi Ting nodded. He was accustomed to Hagrid's generosity, so he picked the materials he needed without hesitation. For the Wanyu shop, Hagrid is a very important supplier. I will take this bow with me when I go to the Forbidden Forest in the future. Hagrid announced with a smile. The Forbidden Forest is a dangerous place, and Hagrid really needs a powerful weapon to protect himself. Of course, for most creatures in the Forbidden Forest, Hagrid himself may be the most dangerous existence. Hagrid, how did you get this thing? Yi Ting pointed curiously at the eye-catching unicorn horn in the pile of materials. Hagrid's collection is dazzling, but Yi Ting fell in love with it at first sight. Alas, it is the horn of a poached unicorn. When mentioning this, Hagrid's eyes flashed with sadness. More than 10 years ago, such cruel things happened repeatedly, and every time I think of it, it makes people feel heartbroken. More than 10 years ago, it was the time when Voldemort and the Death Eaters were rampant. Hagrid sighed softly and continued, the Forbidden Forest is too large, and not all of it belongs to Hogwarts. Although Professor Dumbledore is powerful, he cannot protect the entire Forbidden Forest. However, we have deployed a lot of warning magic at the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Once there is a magical fluctuation, we will be able to sense it immediately. What if those poachers don't use magic? Ting frowned, worried about the weak defense of the Forbidden Forest Wildlife Sanctuary. Humph, if they don't use magic, those thieves can't deal with the little guys in the Forbidden Forest. Hagrid said confidently, and then continued to test his slingshot. An arrow shot out, piercing a thick oak tree with a diameter of at least half a meter, and deeply penetrated another tree 40 centimeters. What a good bow. Hagrid couldn't help but caress the bough affectionately and praised it. I hope you are right. Ting shrugged, and he still had some doubts about what Hagrid said. From a certain point of view, he felt that he had the responsibility and obligation to protect every little life in the Forbidden Forest. After all, they are all his, Hogwarts' precious treasures. After chatting for a while, Hagrid stood up and said excitedly that he would make some special rock cakes for everyone to try. Since Ting's encouragement, he has worked hard and felt that his cooking skills have greatly improved. He even created a herring rock cake. It's very simple, Hagrid said proudly, just ferment the herring and mix it with rock cakes. It's a bit like the cookies with cranberries that you muggles eat. When everyone heard this, they all made excuses to refuse, saying that they had dinner or something, and they just didn't want to try it. After all, except for Ting who can cheat, who doesn't know the reputation of rock cakes. The two girls had heard about this legendary blunt weapon from Hermione. But Hagrid didn't seem to notice everyone's resistance and walked into the kitchen on his own. Just as Jean-Chio and Susan were thinking about how to push all the cookies to Ting, suddenly, the rooster-shaped pointer at the door of Hagrid's house, which looked like a weather vane, suddenly cuckooed and then spun wildly. This really saved everyone's life. Hagrid didn't care about the rock cakes anymore, and rushed out of the door, staring at the direction of the pointer nervously. Hagrid, what happened? Ting asked. Hey, maybe there's a commotion over there with the Centaurs again. Hagrid sighed and scratched his head helplessly. It seems that some unknown creature has entered the Forbidden Forest, disturbing the magical animals inside, and even the Centaurs have been affected. Speaking of this, Hagrid's face was stern, and he said seriously, I have to go and check the situation. As the gamekeeper of Hogwarts, he has no choice but to do this. We want to go and see it together. Ting said immediately. Don't worry, we promise not to cause you trouble. Jean-Chio also hurriedly expressed his attitude, with a face full of excitement, obviously looking for some excitement. But the most active person about this matter is Ting. In his eyes, the Forbidden Forest is a huge collection library, just like the principal's office. Hagrid shook his big head like a rattle and said firmly, no, this time it's not as simple as going to the edge of the Forbidden Forest to feed the moon beast or the ball bird. We have to go deep into the heart of the Forbidden Forest. Hagrid, believe me, I have the ability to protect myself. Ting said hurriedly, as long as I don't get lost, I will never joke with my life. Jean-Chio also added, I run very fast. However, this statement is obviously not convincing. Susan is more self-aware. She didn't say anything, but just pulled Ting's clothes. As long as Ting goes, he must take her with him. Episode 79, Forbidden Forest Exploration. Hagrid, we are just curious and want to see those cute little creatures you mentioned. Ting was eager to learn, for example, centaurs and giant spiders, how magical are they? No, it's too dangerous. You are just first and second grade wizards, what if something happens? Hagrid sighed and didn't continue. If it was a senior, he would consider it. Seeing that he was not willing to listen, Ting could only change his persuasion method. Oh, Hagrid, you should know my ability. Ting sighed softly, and a purple light suddenly flashed in his eyes. He suddenly opened his eyes, and an inexplicable aura emanated from him. Then Hagrid felt that his hair and beard were floating up, without wind. He was ignorant and didn't know that this was a manifestation of the rapid increase in ion concentration in the air. Then, he found that the sky, which was only near dusk, suddenly darkened, as if the night had come early. The sky above was covered with dark clouds, and lightning shuttled through it, flashing dangerous light. But time obviously didn't pass so quickly, could it be? Hagrid looked at Ting in shock. Ting's eyes sparkled, and he seemed to be lifted up by a mysterious force and suspended in the air. From time to time, a trace of electric arc appeared between his feet and the ground, and the whole person was like a god. Then, he waved his hand gently. Boom! A thunderbolt suddenly fell down and hit the oak tree that was shot through by Hagrid. In an instant, the whole tree was chopped into charcoal by lightning, and it was a mess. Ting waved his hand again. Another tree fell down and turned into charcoal. His power seemed endless and daunting. Ting then dispersed the purple light in his eyes and slowly fell from the sky. As Ting dispersed the purple light in his eyes and slowly descended from the sky, the dim sky gradually returned to its original color. Everything seemed to return to calm, but the two charcoal-like trees witnessed everything that had just happened. I have some other spells. Ting clapped his hands with satisfaction, but the place here is too small to cast. Although, Song Lei is only Lisa's fighting skill, it has to be said that if it is used to show off, even Lisa's ultimate move, Rose Lightning, cannot compare to the charged Song Lei. Duh. Hagrid was stunned, his eyes wandering on the two trees that had turned into charcoal, and then turned to the extraordinary little wizard in front of him. The moment he waved his hand just now, the wind and clouds changed color, as if the end of the world was coming. The shocking scene left an indelible impression in Hagrid's heart. Such power is a bit exaggerated. With such a little wizard, who is protecting whom? Seeing that Hagrid was a little shaken, Ting immediately seized the opportunity and struck while the iron was hot. Hagrid, we promise to follow you all the time and never run around. If we encounter any dangerous situation, we will definitely retreat to a safe place as soon as possible. This is much better than us blindly rushing in. Think about Fred and George. We didn't break into the Forbidden Forest like them. We are very good. If it doesn't work, you can give us a map to find the way. After showing his strength, Ting began to persuade Hagrid. These words obviously touched Hagrid and relieved his worries. Hagrid pondered for a moment. Of course, this job was somewhat inconsistent with his position. Then he took out a wrinkled sheepskin circle from his leather coat made of unknown material. What is this? Is it a map? Ting's eyes lit up. He just mentioned it casually, but he didn't expect that Hagrid actually had a so-called map here. He thought that people like Hagrid walked in the Forbidden Forest based on intuition. He couldn't wait to spread out the yellowed parchment scroll, and a hand-drawn map of the Forbidden Forest appeared in front of him. Although the drawing was not very delicate, it clearly marked Hagrid's hut, the general outline of the Forbidden Forest, and the specially marked Centaur tribe. But what made him more excited was that the map also marked the distribution of various precious wild herbs in detail, including magical plants that have grown for hundreds of years. At the same time, the territory of dangerous magical creatures is also clear at a glance. This is the map he wants. With it, Ting can enter the Forbidden Forest by himself, without worrying about the low search efficiency. Keep this, in case we get separated, you can also know where you are. If there is any accident. Hagrid said. Don't worry, I'll take everyone to a safe place. Ting thought for a moment and said, to be honest, I feel safe following you. Hagrid patted his belly proudly, I know this forest very well. In fact, it's not difficult to convince Hagrid, he's a very easy person to understand. For example, if you have a secret you want to make public, just tell Hagrid the secret and say, keep it a secret for me, and you can rest assured that the secret will spread throughout Hogwarts. Of course, the key to success this time is that Ting showed his strength and let Hagrid know that he can ensure the safety of his teammates. In this way, Hagrid believes that with himself and Ting, this expedition is at best a wildlife sightseeing trip with a little excitement. But this does not mean that the Forbidden Forest is not dangerous. The deep forest is like a maze, and you will get lost if you are not careful. Not to mention that there are countless dangerous magical creatures lurking there, such as the eight-eyed giant spider that covers half of the Forbidden Forest, and the terrible mountain trolls. Oh, and there are all kinds of poisonous plants, which ordinary wizards have no way to identify, not to mention that they usually lack the equipment to deal with them. Don't forget to return the map to me later. Hagrid reminded before leaving. He was afraid that Ting would rely on the map to secretly explore the Forbidden Forest. Ting agreed immediately. Hagrid was still trying to put himself in others' shoes. As a half-giant, he obviously underestimated the intelligence of people like Ting. He could remember such a map completely after a few careful glances. Just this once. As he left, Hagrid was still mumbling, don't learn from those two troublemakers in the Weasley family. I spent the whole year trying to drive them out last year. Then let's go. Ting followed Hagrid and walked towards the Forbidden Forest. After successfully persuading Hagrid, Zhang Qiu could hardly hide his surprise. And Susan, when she saw Ting's lightning and thunder skills, had already become starry-eyed. As the sky gradually turned into night, they embarked on a journey to explore the Forbidden Forest. The forest was dense, and the leaves like screens separated the falling snowflakes from the ground. The moonlight was filtered through the layers of leaves, like diluted silver ink sprinkled on the dark forest land, forming a piece of flickering light spots, and the breeze blew slowly with the mixed fragrance of soil and dead leaves. This quiet forest night was broken by a heavy footstep. It was a pair of huge black round-toed leather shoes, more than 50 yards, just Hagrid's big feet. Hagrid walked in front to lead the way, holding Fong tightly in his left hand, holding an ancestral oil lamp in his right hand, and hanging the slingshot on his broad shoulders. In fact, in Hagrid's heart, he hoped to travel with the three-headed dog Fluffy. Such a behemoth would be more worthy of his physique. Although Fong was brave, in Hagrid's eyes, he might still lack momentum. Hagrid walked forward with a steady pace, and the speed seemed slow, but in fact, the three people behind had to trot to keep up with his pace. Well, being young is good, full of energy and enthusiasm. If it were seniors, they would definitely avoid this thankless Forbidden Forest expedition. Hagrid in front still seemed a little worried. He turned to the three people behind him and said, "Why don't you go back now? If there is anything you like in the Forbidden Forest, I can bring it back for you." Ting smiled and responded, "Hagrid, don't worry about us. There is a saying that goes, it is better to loosen than to block. We are just curious. What's more, with you here, the Forbidden Forest is not that scary. As long as you don't provoke those big guys, they should all be deep in the Forbidden Forest, right?" "That's hard to say." Hagrid shook his head and said seriously, "Last time, a wild man-headed lion-body scorpion-tailed beast broke into the Forbidden Forest. I had to break its legs, to let it learn the rules of the Forbidden Forest." Speaking of this, Hagrid's face actually showed a trace of pride. "What is a manticore?" Susan asked curiously. "It is a monster with a human head, a lion's body, and a scorpion's tail." Asterisk asterisk asterisk. With Hermione away, Ting can only temporarily play the role of popular science. In the classification of the Ministry of Magic, its danger level has reached XXXXX. Its skin can almost repel all spells, and being stung by its tail will kill on the spot. As dangerous and rare as the Chimera, the Manticore is famous for the soft hum it emits as it devours its prey. The Manticore's hide repels almost all known spells. Anyone stung by it will die instantly. Speaking of the feat of subduing a wild Manticore, apart from the Hufflepuff wizard who was regarded as a thorn in Grindelwald's side, few wizards dared to pat their chests and say that they could handle it single-handedly. Hagrid is worthy of being Hagrid. Cool. Zhang Qiu sighed sincerely. "I remember Marietta told me that the Ministry of Magic once transported a manticore, and it took a whole team of oars from Greece to handle it. It took 8 people to handle it. Haha, maybe they are just afraid of hurting the manticore." Hagrid smiled and continued, "Those guys from the Department for the Care of Magical Creatures, they are really good at it." Hagrid seemed to be a little at a loss for words, and he seemed to be struggling with how to praise them more appropriately. "Oh, to be honest, the Forbidden Forest is not as safe as you think." He changed the subject and his tone became serious. "If you encounter a group of 2-horned beasts or venomous rhinoceroses, your small bodies may not be enough to fill their teeth." "But don't venomous rhinoceroses eat grass?" Susan asked. "Don't underestimate it. In this Forbidden Forest, that guy is the most dangerous," Hagrid said with a smile. When talking about magical animals, especially wild beasts, his eyes lit up. This is the area he is most proud of. Maybe in this regard, Uncle Songbuska Howd can get it with him. The group walked and talked, slowly moving forward along the forest path. In fact, there are no real roads in the Forbidden Forest. Most of them are narrow paths trampled by wild beasts, and many of them are not suitable for humans. In the end, if we only talk about physical fitness and survival ability in the wild, humans are not the top. Fortunately, intelligence is their magic weapon. For example, when Zhang Qiu fell halfway, Ting quickly cast the floating spell and easily rescued her. However, the girl's physical coordination is really good, not to mention that with the Forbidden Forest leader leading the way, those potential small traps can be easily bypassed by them. Susan, on the other hand, occasionally needs a little help. "Don't be afraid, Susan, just jump, I'm here to catch you," Ting encouraged. Beside the river in the Forbidden Forest, Ting cast the floating spell to hold the 2 girls steadily and help them successfully cross the 3-meter-wide river. Although the feeling of being controlled by magic was a bit awkward, this exciting and safe fun activity was well received by them. At least, from the smile on Susan's face, it is not difficult to see that she is still enjoying this trip to the Forbidden Forest. However, as the sky darkened completely, the 4 people went deeper and deeper into the dark hinterland of the Forbidden Forest. Their actions gradually changed from a relaxing and happy jungle outing to a completely eerie and strange paranormal activity. "Oh, this situation is not right." Hagrid looked up and saw the gray spider web in the sky, frowning, then vigilantly took the slingshot from his back and held it tightly in his hand. Suddenly, a golden mist seemed to sense their arrival and surged towards them. "Be careful, that's the pollen of the fuchsia, don't get close," Ting hurriedly warned. Fuchsia is a very rare magical plant. Its flowers are golden, and its overall appearance is similar to its non-magical relatives. When it grows, it will hang in the shape of an upside-down bell. When it blooms completely, the fuchsia will release golden pollen. When its pollen is inhaled into the body, it will make people hallucinate and feel that they are hanging upside down in the air. Ting waved his hand casually, and the wind element gathered, and a strong airflow swept in, blowing the whole gold far away. He took the opportunity to step forward and broke off a branch with several flowers. Well, take this back to the little bud, it should like it. This is what Ting likes about the Forbidden Forest, magical plants like fuchsia, which cannot even be found in Professor Sprout's greenhouse. Episode 80, Who is the Little Pony? The four continued to move forward, and after walking for about 15 minutes, suddenly, the surrounding noises became noisy. Unknown screams, roars, and horse hooves intertwined, as if they were brought into the ancient battlefield of the Middle Ages in an instant. What's going on? Why is it so noisy all of a sudden? Susan asked, covering her ears and frowning. I don't know, I guess it's the sound of the centaurs, everyone be careful. Ting reminded solemnly. These centaurs are really crazy. Hagrid muttered in dissatisfaction, and his pace accelerated involuntarily. However, before they walked far, an arrow as thick as an arm shot like lightning, straight into the road ahead of them. Don't panic, it's me, Hagrid. He shouted loudly, trying to appease the centaurs in the woods. After a short wait, accompanied by the rapid sound of horse hooves, a centaur dressed in black jumped out of the woods and blocked them aggressively. Haha, Bane, you really gave us a surprise. Hagrid laughed dryly twice, with a bit of embarrassment in his tone. I have never seen anyone greet someone by shooting arrows. Hagrid? Bane's tail swung twice unnaturally, and his tense muscles were more prominent in the dim light. What happened, Bane? Even a centaur can't be so presumptuous in the Forbidden Forest. Hagrid asked seriously. We lost 2 horses. Speaking of this, Bane's voice was full of grief and anger. It must be those hateful 8-eyed giant spiders who have been invading our territory. Hagrid, we have tried our best to remain restrained, but now, the light of Mars has come. As he spoke, he raised the longbow in his hand, and the arrow on it flashed with cold light. Hagrid, if you still insist on your delusion, don't blame me. A trace of determination flashed in his eyes. Hearing this, Ting couldn't help but frown. Although he had heard about the stubbornness of the centaurs in the original book, he still felt very unhappy when he really met them in reality. Especially the one in front of him, he knew the identity of the person, but he still raised his bow and arrow to threaten him. This is really not a friendly neighbor. Calm down, Bane, your enemy is not us. Hagrid hurriedly raised his hands, trying to calm the storm. Hogwarts will protect. This is the sacred territory of the centaurs. Bane seemed to be angered by this sentence. We centaurs will never surrender to wizards. You dare not say this to Dumbledore, centaurs. Zhangqiu couldn't help but muttered in a low voice. However, the centaurs are the most sensitive hunters in the forest, and any subtle noise cannot escape their ears. What did you say, pony? Bane's eyes became sharp in an instant, and the bow and arrow in his hand pointed at Zhangqiu. Are you challenging the dignity of our centaurs? The arrow is on the string, ready to go. As long as Bane loosens his grip, the sharp arrow will penetrate Zhangqiu's chest. The girl's face turned pale instantly, and her heartbeat seemed to be tightly grasped by an invisible hand. The ancient race of centaurs has always occupied a place in human history with its high wisdom and unique culture. Since the ancient Greek era, their figures have constantly appeared in human legends and records. However, communicating with centaurs is by no means easy. Although their knowledge system has a long heritage, it has rarely made progress. They can distinguish a variety of astrological signs and worship sacrificial rituals. In front of such antiques, a straightforward communication method will only hit a wall. In fact, most centaurs are not proud of their race. Even under the cruel selection of natural laws, they are almost facing the fate of being eliminated, and this pride has never wavered. But it is not wise to immerse yourself in the glory of the past. At least, if the centaurs are willing to put down some self-esteem, they may find a way of survival that is more suitable for modern society. Instead of being like now, declining and becoming more and more sensitive, they eventually become like a powder keg that will explode at the slightest provocation. Because of this attitude, it is easy to provoke some people they should not provoke. For example, Yiling, don't point your bow and arrow at my friend. Ting said in a cold voice. However, Bane seemed to be immersed in his own world and ignored Ting's warning. Don't speak casually in the Forbidden Forest. You have to know who is the real master. Seeing that Bane's bow and arrow were still pointing at Zhangqiu, Ting moved. He just waved his hand forward, and the power of the wind element gathered crazily, surging towards Bane like a raging wind and huge waves, causing the centaur to fall back and almost unable to open his eyes. The unexpected attack shocked the centaur. The forbidden forest under the cover of night was very calm, and he didn't even notice where the wind came from. Something is wrong. Bane thought of Ting's action just now, and suddenly realized that it was not natural wind, but the power of magic. But the little wizard didn't hold a wand in his hand, nor did he chant a spell. How did this guy cast magic? Under the impact of the strong wind, Bane had to loosen the bowstring he was holding tightly, and the arrow shot out instantly, but it was seriously deviated from the target due to the influence of the wind and could not hit anyone at all. Then, Ting stomped on the ground suddenly, and the whole person rushed out like an arrow from a string, disappearing without a trace in a dazzling flash. The next moment, his figure seemed to move 10 meters away and appeared directly above Bane. Bane widened his eyes in astonishment, and drew his bow and arrow again, trying to aim at Ting in the air, but it was too late. The young man swooped down from the air like an eagle, rode directly on Bane's back, and tightly pinched his neck with one hand. The centaur felt a strange force coming from the other party's hand, as if to strangle his neck alive. At the same time, the sudden pressure on his back made it almost impossible for him to stand, and his legs softened and he fell to the ground involuntarily. Ting stabilized his body on the centaur's back and relaxed his strength slightly, not directly harming Bane's life, but the brief feeling of suffocation just now was enough to make Bane deeply aware of the potential threat. Ting lowered his head and leaned close to Bane's ear, his voice cold. I said, don't use your bow and arrow on my friends, understand, Colt? You be ************** D. The black centaur Bane roared. He was certainly not a colt, but an adult centaur warrior. Being called so contemptuously, his anger can be imagined. But Ting just increased the strength in his hand a little bit, and said threatening words with a smile, if you move again, I will just break your neck. Bane immediately felt the pressure from his cervical vertebrae, and the familiar feeling of suffocation came again. He was speechless, and could only put down the bow and arrow in his hand obediently. Seeing this, Ting slightly reduced the strength in his hand, allowing Bane to breathe fresh air again. To deal with this kind of guy who bullies the weak and fears the strong, we have to use some hard tactics. Ting thought to himself, while adjusting his sitting position on the horse's back 10 times. To be honest, riding on the back of a centaur feels pretty good, at least it is much more stable than riding a horse. After all, a centaur with a human upper body can better understand the discomfort of humans when facing bumps. Ting even thought for a moment that finding a centaur as a mount seems to be a good choice. But this idea was quickly dispelled by him. If he had to find one, he couldn't find someone like Bane. If it was a female centaur, he might consider it, but a male centaur, forget it. At this moment, there was a sudden sound of hurried horse hooves in the distance, and a group of centaurs with bows and arrows came running wildly. The leader was a red centaur, who shouted loudly, everyone, don't move, put down your weapons. In an instant, Ting and Hagrid and others were tightly surrounded by this group of centaurs, and the atmosphere was extremely tense. Ting rode on the back of the black centaur Bane. He did not let go, but strangled Bane's neck more forcefully, making sure that once the battle broke out, he would break his neck without mercy. He glanced at the red centaur leader with a cold look, and said in a deep voice, this centaur leader, it was your people who were rude to us first. They pointed their bows and arrows at my friends. At this point, Ting's eyes flashed with a sharp light. Also, I don't have a strong control over magic. Once I get emotional, my magic will go out of control. You'd better not provoke me, otherwise. I can't guarantee that he won't turn into a charcoal. Ting said, stretching out his empty hand, and without seeing what he did, a glittering thunder ball appeared in his hand, and the crackling electric current was creepy. At the same time, Ting showed a nuclear smile. Calm down, Megorian. Hagrid persuaded loudly, Ting is a little emotional now, but please believe that we have no ill intentions. Hagrid's words seemed a little pale and powerless. After all, facing the huge group of centaurs in front of him, even a half-blood giant like him had to remain restrained. You know, according to Hagrid's previous experience in dealing with magical animals, if any little cutie dared to show his teeth to him, he would have slapped him 10 times. Unfortunately, there were a little more centaurs in front of him, so he could only persuade him kindly. We are friends, Megorian, Hagrid continued, we came here just to provide some help. You shouldn't have set foot here, let alone bring those foals. Megorian interrupted Hagrid, but still put down the bow and arrow and carried it on his back. Of course, it was on his back instead of his horse's back. Then, Megorian turned to Ting and said seriously, Wizard, I express my sincere apologies to you on your behalf. His impulsiveness and ignorance have caused you trouble. He solemnly promised, now, you can leave with peace of mind. As the leader of the Centaurs, I promise you that no Centaurs will attack you. With a wave of his arm, the Centaurs behind him put down their bows and arrows, stepped back in unison, and made way. Magri, he is a human. He just attacked me. With the support of his tribe, Bane seemed to feel that he was back on his feet, and roared angrily. He just rode on me, which was an insult to me. Under the gaze of many tribesmen, he was ridden by a young man like a real horse. How could he bear this humiliation? Bane, remember our tribe rules, the Red Centaur leader, Magri, also said sternly, don't lose your mind because of anger. We Centaurs must not attack the foe, even if he is a human. Ting had a good impression of Magri. He jumped off Bane's back lightly, and with a flash of light, he instantly returned to Hagrid's side. Then he felt that he was hugged by Zhang Qiu from behind, and something soft pressed on his back. Thank you, Ting. Ting felt his face wet, and his soft lips were like a dragonfly touching the water. Then, the hug left. He looked back at Zhang Qiu. It was the first time for the girl to do this. Her face was red, and she shyly turned away when she saw Ting looking at her. On the other side, Bane stood up shakily, with a look of dissatisfaction on his face. However, Magri came over, lowered her voice, and her tone was extremely stern. Bane, don't let anger cloud your mind. Bane growled, his voice full of humiliation, he rode on me like I was a horse. Megorian 0.5, he insulted me, I must avenge this. Don't forget, you were the first to point the bow and arrow at his friend. Magri's eyes flashed with cold light, staring at Bane closely. Let's not talk about whether you can beat him or not. Even if you can beat him and kill him to avenge yourself, what will happen next? He is a student of Hogwarts. Do you want to trigger a full-scale war between Dumbledore and us? Do you want the entire Centaur tribe to be buried with your impulse? Bane lowered his head under Megorian's stern gaze, with a trace of fear in his eyes. Magri tightly grasped Bane's shoulders, his voice as cold as ice. This is the last time, Bane, remember, don't touch Dumbledore's bottom line, don't hurt Hogwarts students. This is also the bottom line of our Centaurs. Ting didn't know the content of the conversation between Magri and Bane, but the originally aggressive Bane was like a deflated ball at this moment, and obediently returned to the Centaur team. Afterwards, Bane was surrounded by the Centaurs. A red Centaur teased, Bane, I really didn't expect that you would be defeated by a human pony. 11. Ronan, don't try this. Bane roared angrily, his hooves constantly digging the ground. That guy can cast spells without a wand, and I was careless for a moment and fell into his trap. If I had shot the arrow at the beginning, he would be the one falling to the ground now. Those animals who died in the Forbidden Forest also thought so. Ronan laughed sarcastically. Oh, by the way, did that little master not recite the spell when he cast the spell just now? How should I know? Bane snorted coldly, turned his head away, and ignored Ronan.